Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Ming of Revolution. And Putin is teaching Trump some humility. Don't be running your mouth, writing checks, your ass can't cash. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, we knew Trump was bluffing. There's nothing he can do. Calling Putin a crazy man, a madman. The man ain't showed you nuts, but he will sit back and make you watch Ukraine crumble. See, Putin know Trump don't want World War III. So now you got to watch the devastation of Ukraine. They don't want the end of America. They'll be trying to bluff the rest. Not bad. A lot of NATO officers and soldiers dying in Ukraine now, y'all.
The Ukrainian army's position continues to deteriorate rapidly along the entire combat contact line. Numerous pro-Ukrainian Western analytical centers also recognize this fact. According to them, over the preceding 30 days, Ukraine has experienced a loss of approximately 412 square kilometers of territory, of which approximately 300 square kilometers have been forfeited by Ukrainian forces since the previous round of negotiations held in Istanbul. At the same time, it is worth noting that the Russian Defense Ministry claims that Ukraine has lost 560 square kilometers over the past 30 days. According to the Russian military, over the past 30 days, the largest territorial losses of the Ukrainian army have been recorded in Pokrovsk, Velikaya Novoselka, and Konstantinovka directions of the front. Moreover, starting from May 15, the total territorial losses of Ukraine amounted to 390 square kilometers. This area is comparable in size to that of large cities like Sumy and Odessa combined. These are very impressive figures, especially considering the fact that the Russian army has not yet launched a full-scale offensive along the entire combat contact line.
They started today. Looking real bad for Ukraine when NATO.
In this regard, Western warmongers are sounding the alarm. The West did not expect that the Ukrainian army would lose control of the territories at such a high rate. The fact is that even the most pessimistic forecasts of Western experts and analysts did not foreshadow such large territorial losses to Ukraine. Against this backdrop, it becomes clear why the Kiev regime and its European masters are so desperately seeking a 30-day ceasefire from Russia. The European Union and Kiev want to use this temporary truce for a respite and the restoration of the battered Ukrainian army. In addition, European globalists also want to convince the Trump administration to impose new devastating sanctions against Russia and announce a new package of military assistance to Ukraine. However, unfortunately for the Kiev regime and its European masters, the Russian army's successes on the battlefield are so obvious and convincing that Vladimir Putin will never agree to a temporary ceasefire, even under the threat of new, devastating sanctions. Moreover, the West is also annoyed by the fact that Moscow is already behaving like a winner, voicing the conditions of future peace and designating places for negotiations between delegations from Ukraine, the United States, and Russia. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that it was Russia that demanded from the West that the negotiation process take place in countries such as Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Furthermore, despite requests from the West and Ukraine for the second round of negotiations to take place in Switzerland or the Vatican, Russia rejected this proposal. In addition, Moscow also rejected the West's request to transfer to Ukraine the Russian version of the memorandum on the settlement of the current conflict. The fact is that the West wanted to get acquainted with this memorandum before the start of the next round of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Moscow explicitly stated that this memorandum would be handed over to the Ukrainian delegation only during the meeting in Istanbul on June 2, 2025. According to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Moscow will not allow the West to get acquainted with this memorandum before the start of the second round of negotiations. The fact is that Russia is well aware that the EU, Britain, and the United States control all of Ukraine's actions, and that Kiev cannot take even one step without the West's permission. It is obvious that the West wanted to get acquainted with this memorandum in advance, in order to prepare for the Ukrainian delegation only those answers that are beneficial to the EU, Britain, and the United States. Thus, as we can see, Russia has stopped being naive. Russia no longer trusts the West, and is talking to the EU, Britain, and the United States from the position of a winner, making it clear that all of Moscow's conditions will be accepted. As I said earlier, this became possible only thanks to the Russian army's successes on the battlefield. If we look at the Russian army, it becomes clear that it works as a single living mechanism, moving forward no matter what. As a result, Moscow has achieved such obvious and impressive results over the past 3 years, that even the West has to accept and consider this. By the way, in the last 24 hours, the Russian army has achieved another significant success in the Special Military Operations Zone. So, on the morning of May 30th, war correspondents stated that the Russian army had managed to liberate the settlement of Redko-Dub, in the north of the Donetsk region. Simultaneously with this, Russian troops also managed to expand their control zone towards neighboring Karpovka, and enter the settlement of Grekovka. Currently, Russian troops control 30% of this settlement's territory. In the last 24 hours, Russian troops have also improved their position in Chasiv Yar. In particular, a few hours ago, sources in the Russian military department said that the Russian army had managed to make significant progress in Chasiv Yar, taking control of half of the Levanevsky microdistrict. Currently, 80% of the city's territory is under the Russian army's control. To fully liberate Chasiv Yar, the Russian army needs to take control of such microdistricts as Zavodskoy, Shevchenko, and the rest of the Levanevsky microdistrict. Meanwhile, on the night of May 30th, Russia launched another missile attack on military installations of the Ukrainian army and NATO forces in Ukraine. This time, independent monitoring services recorded dozens of explosions in Kharkiv, Sumy, and Nikolaev regions. It is authentically known that in the border settlements of the Kharkiv and Sumy regions, the main targets of Russian missiles and kamikaze drones have become the sites of concentration of enemy units. As a result, about 100 Ukrainian soldiers and foreign mercenaries were killed, including the Ukrainian Army Major Valery Galasin. Against this backdrop, I would like to draw your attention to the missile attack on a classified NATO command post in the suburbs of Nikolaev. The footage clearly shows how Russian intelligence managed to identify the ammunition depot, the parking lot of heavy equipment, and the command post of the Special Operations Center of the Ukrainian Army and NATO forces. 2 minutes later, these secret enemy facilities were hit by an Iskander-M ballistic missile. Later, about 30 kamikaze drones also rained down on these facilities. Sources in the Russian military department confirmed that as a result of this missile strike, 5 British and Ukrainian Special Forces commanders, as well as about 60 Ukrainian soldiers and 20 foreign mercenaries, were killed. It is well known that all of them were British citizens.
To my brother, Dream Master for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a real life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. See, I'm tapping in before work to ask, did you see TMZ interview with Trump? Asking would he pardon Puff, and he said pretty much. And he said yes, pretty much. Salute. Got to roll up, tap in later, roll up that good dinner, man. Appreciate the love, family. Help me keep the lights on at the House of Revolution. Now, I didn't see that. We're gonna look into that. Puff don't deserve no pardon though, but he probably got some dirt on Trump.
The Russian armed forces appear to have started their summer offensive, and they are now advancing at the fastest pace this year. The United States, Europe, Ukraine seem to be confused on what this signaling is coming from Russia, even though they have been very explicit going back to June of last year at the very latest. You could argue that they've been saying the same things for the most part since Istanbul in 2022. But there have been some changes in the last 24 hours, actually in the last 12 hours, as a matter of fact. And there is a bombshell video I'm going to show you at the end where I have to date never seen Russia be so explicit at an official level. You're not going to want to miss that. Stick around to the end. By the way, also be able to like and subscribe. That helps us out a lot. Thank you. First of all, let's take a look here. Talking about some confusion on what's going on. The New York Times, first of all, is just pointing out the obvious. This was from, I believe it was yesterday, where they're saying that Russia appears to have launched its new offensive amid peace talks. So they're kind of confused on that. It's like they're not playing fair. And that's kind of a general thesis and theme that you'll see throughout the Western world. And you'll see it a lot in Ukraine, in London, Paris, all over the place in official EUdom. And in the Western media, you see here. And in this article, they point out that after incremental gains for months, Russian forces are advancing on Ukrainian battlefield at the fastest pace this year. They are bombarding Ukrainian cities with some of the biggest drone and missile strikes of the war. They have even opened a front in the north. The Kremlin's summer offensives appear to be underway. And listen, I want to talk about, kind of connect the dots here, so to speak, that it's not many times in the headlines, the Western people will talk about, and Zelensky has been doing this a lot. We saw Friedrich Merz from the German chancellor did it just a couple of days ago. They talk about all these drone attacks that are coming in from Russia. And they always put it in the context of, while we're trying to negotiate peace, here comes these darn Russians firing all these missiles and drones into Ukrainian cities and blowing stuff up. And Trump has said a bunch of times, that makes me mad, that makes me angry, that Putin has gone crazy, what's he thinking, etc. But they don't put this in the context. Yes, Russia is talking. Yes, Russia is willing to have negotiations. They offered. They're the ones that offered. You may recall Putin 2 or 3 weeks ago offered to say, hey, let's have direct talks with Russia and Ukraine, the two principal parties of the war, not even just the United States, not even just Europe, etc., but specifically the parties. It hadn't happened since 2022, so that was a good first step. But Russia is explicitly said that they would talk without any preconditions, but they would keep fighting. They would continue to conduct the war on the ground, and they never stopped. They never said anything besides that. They didn't imply they would stop. In fact, the only even discussion about any kind of a ceasefire said, we'll consider a ceasefire, and talking about the 30-day, not the one over May, not the short-term ones, but the one on Easter. Those are just like momentary things that was for their own reasons. I'm talking about actual cessation of the war, the 30-day unconditional ceasefire that we've been trying to foist onto Russia for many, many months now. Russia said, I'll contemplate that, but there's a lot of conditions that would have to go on to that. There's this whole 30-day unconditional ceasefire, not even on the table for the Russian side. Again, if you're paying attention, if you're listening to what the other side is saying, no one should be surprised on that. But it seems like many people are. And these drone attacks that I referred to a second ago are not one-offs here. They're not to send a message, at least not per se. They're tied in with the larger offensive that the Russians are undergoing. They're continuing to advance at their fastest pace because they're putting everything together. And as in fact, let's just go, Gary, to the next headline there, the New York Times headline. The article goes on to say that Russian forces are pushing into the remaining Ukrainian-controlled territories in the Donbass area in the east. In the fourth year of the conflict, that has become a war of attrition. Now, that's a key phrase there that should indicate to the New York Times and their readers what the Russian objectives are. More on that in a minute. They continuing on. They used the winter lull to build up equipment reserves, improve battlefield communications, and tweak the tactics and technical capabilities of attack drones. So what Russia has been doing is that they have been continuing to fight on the front, but especially at the rapid pace that they were advancing toward the end of 2024, there was a pause in there. We observed that. We observed that they were slowing down. And at the time, it wasn't clear what was going on. Now it's becoming more apparent. Russia had been using that time to update their tactics, techniques, and procedures. We call them in the Army TTPs, to where they are saying, all right, what's worked and what hasn't. Let's while keeping the pressure on, because they don't want to let the pressure off the defenders, especially along the front lines. But then they were slowing the pace because for their larger force, they're saying, all right, where can we tweak what we've been doing? What has been working well? What has not been working well? Let's stop doing the dumb stuff that hasn't worked, and let's start doing the smarter stuff that has. That's mirrored in what we talked to with Will Puello, the American drone pilot who's fighting on the Russian side. When we had him on our show, he told us that same kind of thing and what the Russian side had been doing from his perspective there. So that lines up with what we've seen at the tactical level all the way up to the operational level on the ground. They've also been, as Will also demonstrated, their drone capacity and their techniques and how they employ them. They're also upgrading their technical capacity. There's more of them. I mean, they have the reconnaissance drones, what they call the bomber drones that drop ordnance. That's what Will's particular specialty was. The FPV drones, the ones that fly into the quadcopters. And there's also the larger level attack drones like the Garins, et cetera. So many different classes, and they're continuing to expand. The Garin itself has a new variant in it. I want to say it's the third or fourth generation. Much faster, carries a bigger payload, is more expensive, but it's much more effective for the Russian side, and we're seeing that play out now. So the Russians are saying we're hitting strategic depth targets. We're hitting operational targets in the what we call the operational zone, the areas behind the front line for the Ukraine side. They're hitting the ammunition depots, fuel depots, command and control nodes, and especially they're one of the primary targets really of both sides right now. If you can find out where the drone operators are, that's one of the biggest priority targets above really anything right now, maybe even more than ammunition storage, as important as that is. They like to go after those drone operators. That's today's big issue here. But that's what the Russians have been doing. So as a result, they were kind of in a lull. While they were still talking, Russia has said nothing different than at any point they're willing to entertain a ceasefire and an end of war negotiation that meets their conditions. And I keep using the phrase, it's the ugly deal. That's what they've been offering while they've been preparing. Now it appears that they have said, okay, we have learned our new TTPs. We've got our new tactics with drones that are new capabilities, these fiber optic drones as well. And now then we're starting to employ them in bigger percentages and larger chunks. Now they're taking much bigger chunks of territory. And let me show you what that graphically looks like. I'm going to put a chart up on the screen here. It is I'm sure that if you have a phone, I'm sorry, it's probably going to be impossible to read. It's difficult even on a screen, but I want to point out several things here. This is from Deep State, which is a pro-Ukraine outfit that tracks how much territory has either been won or lost by the Ukraine side since the war goes. This literally goes all the way back to the first. I have selected to show here a chart going back to June 2023 during the ill-fated Ukrainian offensive. And so what you see in the bottom of that chart there in the kind of a purplish square area there is you see from June, July, August, and September, Ukraine was regaining territory. So they were acquiring territory at the numbers that, if you can see them on the right there, 313 square kilometers in June, 47 in July, 273 in August. That was their second best month. And then 181 square kilometers they recaptured in September 2023. That is it. That is the last time that Ukraine captured any territory. And from that moment forward, the Russians started out. So from November 2023 until today, it has been a nonstop Russian advance. That is one of the key things that this chart graphically depicts, that you see that the Russians have going to all this stuff. Even looking at from, say, November 2023, December 2023, and then January 2024, it started picking up the pace. And then you started seeing through the rest of 2024, the numbers kept getting bigger, bigger, and bigger. And then especially, I think the high water mark came in November, where there was 725 square kilometers of territory, a pretty sizable pace. That's when Russia apparently took not an operational pause, which kind of had been characterized in the first couple of years of the war, especially, but they just went on a reduced operational capacity while they did some other stuff. So I think they had learned that if you go on a operational pause where you stop and just kind of regain, rest up, etc., all you're going to end up doing is giving the Ukraine side a chance to also recover. And then once you start back, it's going to be harder to continue on. So this time they just reduced it a little bit. But then you see in, I guess it was April. Yeah, April. April kind of was the low water mark, and then toward the end of April, 1st of March, you started seeing an increase there. And then in April, there was 177 square kilometers recaptured. And then even though there's still 2 or 3 days left in the month of May already, they have more than doubled what they took in April. So that shows you that they are on a significant increase. It's as of the date of this chart, which I think was effective as of this morning, it was 418,000 square kilometers. The other thing I want to point out here is in the kind of the orange yellowish kind of area to the right of that red arrow you see at the top, the red box rather, and that is in Russia. And that is, you see that going back to August of 2024, when the Ukraine side captured all of this territory. And in the first month, the Ukraine side captured 823 square kilometers of Russian territory. From that day forward, starting in September of 2024, it was a methodical loss. It was from the Ukraine. So the territory they gained, they then began to cede it, and fairly methodical and even small numbers until you got into March of this year, when there was the big, huge push where it went from, if you can't read those numbers, I'll just pick up a number from December. This past December, the Russians regained 54 square kilometers, 53 square kilometers, 17 square kilometers, and then the explosion in March, 341, where they had this massive breakthrough and just almost drove Ukraine completely out. And then the final 51 square kilometers came out in April. And now you see it's back to where it was. Now, that is important for more than just the interesting about how it physically transpired, because you can graphically see how all of these trends are working to the disadvantage of the Ukraine side. When you talk about how the whole war is being conducted, and you see that, and we talked about this, I think, like maybe the second or third day of the offensive in August of last year. I said, what does Ukraine think they're going to do? They don't have the manpower, the equipment, the logistics, anything to actually put any kind of to invade Russia and to actually put any pressure on them that would cause them to have to back off, or that would put Moscow at risk or something like that. All it was going to be is a diversion, but at a tremendous cost for the Ukraine side. Russia did eventually, at some points, did have to divert troops from elsewhere, of course, because they didn't have that many on there. But most of the diversion came inside of Russia, not from the front in the Eastern Front. There were apparently a small number temporarily, which then were redeployed back. In exchange for that temporary inconvenience for the Russian side, the Ukraine lost upwards somewhere between 70 and 80,000 troops, and that's the killed. I don't know how many were wounded, but it was an egregious cost to them. And now then, let's see. I don't think I have that map handy. If I don't, I might. Let me see here. Yep, I do. Just give me 1 second. I want to show you graphically on the map what has happened because of that Kursk offensive and how that plays into the current offensive going on with the Russian side right now. Let me run and switch here and show you my screen. And I'm going to pick that map up right here. This is the area. This is where the Kursk area was. This is where the Ukraine side had, captured lots of Russian territory. That's all gone now. But you may recall that toward the end of it, and just before that big splurge where 341 square kilometers were recaptured within the month. The Russians started putting pressure on in the Sumy area here. And you may recall I showed you how they were putting pressure in here to try and cut off the one road that was heading up there. And if they could get into that, they would take it under fire control to where they would make it even more difficult for the Ukraine side to sustain all the troops that were up in here. Well, as I predicted, I said, now when the question is, when they get through the border, are they going to stop there? And now the answer is unequivocal no. Now then, here in the Sumy area, where Putin has also said he wanted a buffer zone created, whether he actually just wants that 100-kilometer zone that they put on the map, or whether that was just cover for saying we're opening a northern front is unclear. But now then we see it is clear there has been considerable forward progress by the Russian side here. And actually, at this point, I want to switch over to military summary, because they were talking about this earlier today and really putting context what's happening up in Sumy.
According to information we have during the previous 24 hours, and according to several very reliable pro-Russian resources, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Alexeyevka. So this village was taken by the Russians during the previous 24 hours. The Russians managed to improve their position significantly, as you can see, and now we see and we understand that most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from the villages of Novomykhailaivka and Varachne, further in the direction of Yablunovka, and then further in the southern directions to the village of Marina. So the Ukrainians most likely would be forced to abandon their positions in this area. Furthermore, several pro-Russian resources reported that during the previous 12 hours, the Russians managed to shorten the distance and to get as close as possible to this settlement of Varachne. So the situation for the Ukrainians is very difficult, and most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to abandon every single village in this area. And the next more or less reliable defense belt that Ukrainians have is this huge forest between Russian positions and the city of Sumy. So this huge forest is something where Ukrainians will try to slow down and to stop the Russians.
So that's what's going on in Sumy. Similar things are happening in the Kupiansk area. There's even forward momentum back again in the Kursk area, where they're moving south into Volchansk. And then several other places in the Pokrovsk general area, there's continued to be in forward movement in those areas as well. So really all across the front, Russia's continuing on. And you see, according to the New York Times, they're taking about 5 square kilometers per day on average. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's a little bit less. But as you see, it is a methodical, across the board area. And you see in that Sumy area, there could be some other really big moves in the next couple of days, way more than 5 kilometers, but that's not a minor number anyway, because the real issue behind those numbers, the square kilometers, again, we got to get ourselves out of the Western mindset, which equates how much territory gain with success or failure. For the Russian side, that's a byproduct. From the Russian mentality and their doctrine, the way they're fighting, they want to destroy the Ukrainian armed forces. Recall that show I did on drones a week ago, and one of the key things that we talked about in there was that we looked at a Ukrainian from the Kiev Independent who had done lots of research and has been doing frontline investigations and reporting throughout the war from 2023 to 2024. And then now in 2025, he graphically showed you on a map how the Ukrainian, the fabric of their defenses is continuing to shrink, even within the front line itself, wherever the front line is and how much territory is moved back, everything on the other side of that line is getting thinner. And that is the real problem, because the Russian side is not getting thinner on their offensive. They still have more men every month than they lose, and the Ukraine side doesn't. So that amount of territory is an important marker, but the biggest marker is the manpower here. And that shows you what Russia's tactics are. All of these missiles that are coming in and the drones that are firing throughout the country are continuing to weaken the support that is able to get to the front. At the front, they're using all of these direct fire and the drones and the artillery, the glide bombs, all those kinds of things to continue to destroy the manpower itself. All these things are totally weakening the Ukrainian armed forces. That should give you an idea of where the Russians are going. I'm going to be a little bit more explicit in a minute, but even without talking to any Russians or listening to anything they say, just looking at what they're doing on the battlefield, they are trying to win the war. It's not hard to see. They are taking actions at the strategic, operational, and tactical levels to win the conflict. And in every domain, they are succeeding. And all the inputs that they have gives every indication that they're going to continue to. The New York Times was correct in that clip I showed you a second ago, where they said it's a war of attrition. And that's exactly what Russia's doing. They are fighting and grinding down the cumulative total of everything that the Ukraine side is doing. At the diplomatic level, at the production level, economic level, and at the manpower level. Everything you want to look, it is an attrition war, and Russia is succeedingly grinding down the Ukraine side. So there shouldn't be any confusion, but there is, and there remains to be so. And unfortunately, that extends to the highest levels of the U.S. government. Yesterday at a press briefing, Caroline Leavitt was asked, where is President Trump on this right now?
President Trump said that he needed 1.5 to 2 weeks to determine whether or not he believed Vladimir Putin wanted peace. He has been in office now for 4 months. What does he believe is going to happen in the next 1.5 to 2 weeks that would change his opinion?
Well, it is my understanding, and it is our hope, that Russia and Ukraine will engage in direct talks and negotiations next week in Istanbul. And we believe that meeting is going to take place. And that is a meeting the president encouraged and urged for these two sides to come together and negotiate directly. And the president has been clear from the very beginning of this conflict that he wants to see this conflict solved on the negotiating table, not on the battlefield. And he's told that to both leaders, again, both publicly and privately. So hopefully next week, it will move the ball forward.
In this, is going to participate in those conversations.
We will let you know if the president plans to send a representative. I'm not tracking that at this time.
Okay, that last part was kind of important there, where she reiterated, and that reporter asked, we showed you, I think yesterday or day before, that Trump had said, hey, within 2 weeks, we're going to know if I'm being tapped along or if not, and then we may take a different course of action. So the question was, what's going to happen in those 2 weeks? Well, now then we see that the next level of talks is at least scheduled. And by the way, Sergei Lavrov, as you'll see in just a second here, said that they're preparing to go on June 2nd, which is Monday. As of airtime today, the Ukraine side has not agreed to do that yet. So we don't know if Zelensky's even going to send any delegations this time. I think that he's probably trying to calculate inside whether that's going to gain him or lose in him anything in his images in the West. I think that he probably has to go, because if he doesn't, I think that's going to make it easier for Trump to say, okay, we're going to walk. If you're not even trying to talk, because you heard Caroline Leavitt say he put his stamp of approval on that meeting, saying, yes, let's get together and talk. And I've encouraged both sides privately and publicly. So if Zelensky doesn't go, that's not going to play well. So I imagine that he'll probably end up going. But who's not going is us, because you heard Caroline Leavitt there ask, what about the U.S. participation? She said, we don't have any plans to go at this time. So this is direct between them. So this could indicate that the U.S. is now willing to actually do what Trump has threatened to do many times, which is to walk. And you may recall, at least for a while, I guess it was about a month ago, you had the Tammy Bruce, the spokeswoman for the State Department, said, we're out of the mediating business. It's now between them. And of course, that wasn't the case, because then we did participate in the Istanbul meetings, the first ones that happened after that. But now it appears that we're not going to participate here, leaving it up to the two parties. Now, as for the Russian side, let's look at that first. Sergei Lavrov was talking about this meeting and what the intent of the meeting is supposed to be for.
Тогда же в Стамбуле было условлено о том, что Москва и Киев подготовят документы, излагающие позицию каждой из сторон для достижения устойчивого урегулирования. Российская сторона, как и договаривались, оперативно разработала соответствующий меморандум, который излагает нашу позицию по всем аспектам надежного преодоления первопричин кризиса. Наша делегация во главе с Владимиром Мединским готова представить этот меморандум делегации Украины и дать необходимые пояснения в ходе второго раунда возобновленных прямых переговоров в Стамбуле в ближайший понедельник, 2 июня.
Okay, so Russia was very clear at the ministerial level to communicate that same phrase that you see a lot, the root causes. So He says, we've got this memorandum we produced. We're going to bring it to the delegation on Monday. And that's how we're going to negotiate this. Now, it's not hard to figure out what's going to be in that memorandum. It's the administrative borders of all 4 of the territories, which means the withdrawal of the Ukraine armed forces from a lot of territory that they currently control. I've shown you the clip there a lot, or the quote from the news that Zelensky said, "I'm not going to withdraw from anything." So already it's dead on arrival. Even if the two sides do go, we already know that they're intractable on that. But that's the least of them, probably, because there's also demilitarization, denazification, declaration from NATO that they will never accept Ukraine into it, et cetera. And then some other things beyond that. But those are the big ones there. So we're sure that that's going to be in the Russian memorandum that's going to be delivered to the Ukraine on Monday if that event comes off. On the Ukraine side, however, there may be even more distance between the two sides, as you still see Zelensky, who said this yesterday.
Росія затягує війну і робить все, щоб просто обдурити країни, які ще намагаються впливати на Москву словом, а не тиском. Слова з Москвою не працюють. Навіть так званий меморандум, який вони обіцяли, і начебто більше тижня готували, досі ніхто не бачив. Україні не передали, нашим партнерам не передали. Навіть Туреччині, як країні, яка приймала першу зустріч, теж не передали нову адженду. І хоча обіцяли абсолютно протилежне, і перш за все вони обіцяли це Сполученим Штатам Америки, президенту Трампу, черговий російський обман. Все вони роблять, щоб зустрічі були пустими. Це ще одна причина, щоб були достатні санкції, достатній тиск.
So if you weren't able to read those letters, I know they're kind of small, especially on a phone screen. Generally, what he said is these talks are going to be meaningless anyway. We need to put more pressure on the Russian side and force them into negotiations, into just and lasting peace, and all this stuff. He says a lot. It's funny. There's one thing in there he said that I think is accurate. He said the Russians don't respond to words. He may have had a different meaning, but it's pretty clear the Russians don't respond to words. And especially when your words aren't matched up by any kind of reality on the battlefield. And so these threats of sanctions, these coercive threats of all kinds of things from the West, that we're going to harm you, et cetera, maybe use long-range missiles, all those kind of things. Russia's just looking at the ground and going, and your point would be what? All of this leads to some confusion and something that, and I have to admit, I have a little confusion here too. My confusion centers, though, around how can we not be clear, crystal clear, what the Russians are doing, what their intent are. A lot of the confusion centers around people saying, how can they not do this 30-day ceasefire? You can't have a negotiated end if you don't first have a ceasefire. That's obvious. It's not.
Revolutionary salute y'all, brother. For the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a real life. And salute, King. We in here. We definitely in here. Salute, family. I appreciate you helping to keep the lights on.
Obvious. In fact, it's not even common that much in the world. You look at, especially when things have happened before, with the First World War, how that came to a negotiated settlement. The Korean War, especially, that thing took like a year and a half, if I'm not mistaken, of negotiations while the fighting was going on the whole time. And then you look at the Second World War. Now that was a little different because the Soviet side and the Allied United States and the West cumulatively looked for unconditional surrender. Then they said they reached a point where they said, all right, no more negotiations. Now we're just going to fight until you lose. And so that's exactly what happened. So there wasn't any real negotiation there. The fighting continued on until the German side lost the ability to continue to wage war. Of course, Hitler committed suicide and all that. So there are multiple ways that conflicts come to an end. And if you think that because we have decided that you have to stop talking first, or you have to stop fighting first, and then have a negotiated settlement, that doesn't mean the other side is going to play along with that, especially when it's not in their view. But going back to that New York Times piece before, they have a different kind of confusion. And again, if you could toss that one up there. The New York Times itself is confused, and then some of the experts that they talk about is unclear. The New York Times writes, it is unclear what role the Kremlin expects the unfolding offensive to play in the broader complex diplomatic maneuvers over ending the war. Some Western analysts say that Mr. Putin may be using the dry weather season most conducive for offensive operations to maximize his negotiating power before giving more weight to peace talks later this year. Okay, look, folks, I don't understand how you're confused on this. They're not pushing to get a better negotiating position. They already have it. They already have the dominant position. Why did they need to fight a little bit more so that they can get a better dominant position? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And it's just like we don't listen to anything the Russian side has been saying. I mean, how many sound bites have I put in over the last just 4 months from Vladimir Putin, from Lavrov himself, or showed things from Peskov? They've all been saying the same things here. We had on our show Ambassador Polyansky, the deputy UN ambassador for the Russians in New York, and he was pretty clear on that we will either win with negotiations or we will keep fighting. So he still used kind of diplomatic language. Now, here's something that happened yesterday at the United Nations Security Council. There were speeches made by the U.S. ambassador, who was at that time, I think his name is Kelly, Ambassador Kelly, and then he's going to be followed by the Russian ambassador Nabinzia. Now, first of all, note what the American guy is going to say here, because he's going to kind of repeat something that the White House has been saying, but kind of in genteel language.
The United States has worked tirelessly with both sides, seeking a path to peace. We want an end to this war. As the first step on that path to peace, the United States put forward a proposal for an immediate, unconditional, and comprehensive ceasefire. Ukraine unequivocally accepted, pending Russia's agreement to do the same. Since then, we have been urging Russia to accept a ceasefire. Following President Trump's May 21 call with Russian President Putin, the Russian Federation is expected to provide a term sheet broadly outlining its vision for a ceasefire. We will judge Russia's seriousness towards ending the war not only by the contents of that term sheet, but more importantly, by Russia's actions. If Russia makes the wrong decision to continue this catastrophic war, the United States will have to consider stepping back from our negotiation efforts to end this conflict. To be clear, in doing so, we would not be abandoning our principles or our friends. Rather, we would be recognizing Russia's refusal to work with us toward a desirable outcome.
Desirable from whose perspective? I get it. We want the desirable outcome for us is negotiate a settlement where Russia just stops where they are and doesn't go any further and doesn't demand anything more, leaves Ukraine intact, leaves the Zelensky regime intact, allows them to have negotiations, allows them to have bilateral relations, etc., and just keep all that open. I get it. That's what you would want. But listen, when you say that kind of thing on the floor of the United Nations Security Council, that if we don't get the desired end we want, then we will walk away. And then just say, this is not us abandoning our friends or anybody else. It's just us walking away and leaving them to their own fate. I mean, it kind of is. I mean, if we're just being honest. Now, that's what I recommend. I've been saying it for months. That's exactly what we should do, to say, you guys figure this out, because no one's listening to us anyway. No, I'm talking about the Western side, not even talking about Russia at this point. Nobody, neither anybody in Kiev nor in Brussels or the other capitals in Europe seem to be listening to anything that we say. They seem, I mean, you saw Zelensky there in that clip I just played from yesterday. He hasn't changed anything. He still doesn't want to have a negotiated settlement. He doesn't want to give up anything. He doesn't want to listen to anything the Russians say. He just wants to keep fighting. And then he just wants the West to keep doing more sanctions, more air defense missiles, more artillery pieces, everything. I mean, he just wants more of all that stuff. It just doesn't want anything around diplomacy. So I told you about Ambassador Polyansky that we interviewed last month and what he said. Last night, and I mentioned this at the outset of the show, last night at the United Nations Security Council, The Russian ambassador followed up the American statement there with something that could not be any more crystal clear and explicit. And why this is not on this morning's New York Times, since the speech was made in New York, I don't know, but I haven't even seen, maybe it's just been mentioned somewhere, but this should be a bombshell because he lays out in the most explicit terms available exactly what Russia's plan is.
No new anti-Russian sanctions, nor deliveries of weapons to Ukraine or any other hostile steps vis-à-vis Russia will be able to prevent the inevitable military defeat of the Zelensky regime. The ball is in Ukraine's court. Either talks followed by peace, or the unavoidable defeat of Ukraine on the battlefield with different conditions for the conflict's end.
And there you have it. Explicitly, you either come to the negotiating table and get an ugly deal and we end the fighting today, or we go into the inevitable military defeat. That is point blank claimed by the Russian side. And why in the world that's not on every headline in the Western world, I can't understand. You keep saying it's unclear to us what the Russians are doing. It's only unclear because you're closing your eyes and you're putting your fingers in your ears. There he said it. Ambassador Polyansky was almost as explicit, not quite. This time, the ambassador, the primary ambassador, is military defeat on the battlefield. He explicitly said it there. So now then, you go back to all that chart that I'd showed you before about all the territory that the Ukraine side has been losing. We look at what the Russian side is able to do with their manpower. They continue to recruit sometimes by 10,000 in a single month, more than they lose. Their production capacity continues to go up the chart. Their economy is growing at 4+% per year, while Europe's is at cumulatively about 1%. We can't produce enough ammunition for the Ukraine side in total to offset what the Russian side is doing by itself, not to mention what it's getting from North Korea and Iran to continue on with the drones and the artillery rounds. So there is no reason at all to think that this war of attrition, which the New York Times acknowledges the Russians are fighting, can even be a defeat can be avoided. It's not even a hypothetical possibility that Ukraine could ever stop Russia and then move back on the offensive and then drive Russia out. That's not even in the realm of weird hypotheticals. But there's not even the possibility that's rational that you can stop the onslaught. In a war of attrition, as I keep citing that Royal United Services report from last year, which just laid it out there for you. A war of attrition is not going to be won as much on the battlefield or tactics or anything like that, but in who can outproduce the other side, especially in production capabilities and in manpower. You get those two things, it's just inertia. It's just math. You can't sustain this. Whether they have a big breakthrough quickly, or whether they just continue to methodically chew. As I pointed out there, the fabric, the thickness of the Ukraine defenses, despite where the lines have been moving slowly, everything behind the line is getting thinner and thinner and thinner. Now, you can just imagine if the U.S. does what they imply here, if Trump does in the next couple of weeks, say, all right, we did our best, we're walking, we're going to be done with that. If that happens, that will accelerate the end because Trump has already not offered even the possibility of any additional support beyond what the Biden administration put forth. And by all accounts, that's going to completely run out sometime this summer. And we're almost in June already. So that means maybe with just a matter of a handful of months, just a few. So can the Ukraine side even continue to wage conflict regardless of their manpower issue, which is already on the dearth side? It's getting weaker every single month because the casualties are not being offset by recruiting and forced mobilization. Not hard to figure out, folks. So if you want this war to come to an end, take the ugly deal on the table today. And if you don't care anything all about the Ukraine people, then just keep on saying, yeah, let's give them more stuff. Let's try more sanctions. Let's try an 18th round, a 19th round. Let's make Lindsey Graham so happy and have another American round of sanctions. So it seems to be a big political win for him. Whatever. just understand that when he's going to be clapping and people are going to be slapping him on the back, and all these people in Kiev are going to be saying, yeah, thanks a lot. Zelensky, of course, will be at the first of that line. All it's going to be doing is guaranteeing more Ukrainian men die. That's it. Bottom line, the war is lost. It's already over. It's already, the decision is already concluded. The end itself, what we don't know yet is the final cost in blood, in territory, and in treasure, both for the Ukraine side. And then, of course, and we'll deal with this in the months ahead, the fallout from that are going to be substantial, because this is basically you're watching a slow motion geopolitical earthquake going on. I don't know if you guys saw it, but here a few days ago there was just a really big rock slide in Switzerland, and just this devastating thing. You just saw this thing had been weakening and weakening, and they had gotten a lot of the people out because they recognized what was coming. And then all of a sudden, just this single moment came when a collapse happened, and this just massive slide just came rolling down the mountain, just engulfed everything in its path. I think that we're probably observing the early stages of that. We should be evacuating all the people on the Ukraine side from the danger zone here by diplomatically ending the war now, so that it keeps them safe. Because if you don't, if you keep on the path you're at here, it's going to be like that village at the bottom of the hill, although the people were still there. I mean, they would have all been buried. 90% of the village was consumed anyway. And that's what we're inflicting on the Ukraine side if we keep going down the path that we're on. So the most moral thing that Trump can do right now is to end the war, and to end our support for the war, rather. Because now then that will force the Western side, the rest of Europe. Yeah, that's the one right there. Yeah, just take a look at that there.
Of which Russia has some of the best in the world, if not Mark Sloboda. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Rachel, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always good to have you. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as we've seen Russia launch some of its largest drone and missile attacks on Ukraine yet over the last week. And now Zelensky is warning that Russia is amassing around 50,000 troops, he says, in the Kursk region, which of course borders Ukraine's northeastern Sumy region. So how do you view the current state on the battlefield? Does it seem like Russia is preparing to launch some sort of an offensive into the Sumy region?
Okay, so first of all, let's address the long range strikes, which is going on the air. Both sides are actually launching record long range drone strikes against each other, like for the past more than a week at this point. Like the Kiev regime has launched regularly now 200 plus 300 drones every night. Russia, usually actually the numbers of drones that Russia is launching are slightly less. Although you're absolutely correct that Russia did launch the largest, one of them that they launched was the largest one that they had launched so far in this conflict that hit 300. But Russia's strikes usually include a number of missiles as well, which of course are far more effective, far more powerful than the drones are. And it has to be said that Russia's drones, for a number of reasons, we could talk about it for an hour, but generally Russia's drones are far more effective. They're far more sophisticated drones. They carry much bigger payloads. The Garans are now, the Garan 3s are now jet powered and capable of climbing to high altitudes and diving down. And Russia actually has probably the world's best, hands down, integrated, multi-layered air defense and electronic warfare network, which means only a tiny fraction of the Kiev regime's drones, very tiny, get through, and those that have, I always look to see what the damage is, and I'm very concerned about it. And honestly, after more than 2,000 drones launched in under a week, and I'm sure it's higher than that number. That was just 1 point during the week. So 2,000 Kiev regime long-range strike drones launched in a few days. The damage was still absolutely minimal. So what both sides are doing is a drone war of attrition, right? The goal of this is primarily at this point the other side's air defense. Also, Russia's hitting military industrial targets for a certainty. But the goal is, one, to exhaust the enemy's air defense, right? So that you are using everything up by continually trying to shoot it down every night. Hundreds of drones. You run out. You don't use missiles on everything, of course, right? Air defense missiles, interceptors. But you have to use a number of them, and smaller air defense systems. You're just using up assets, air defense assets like crazy. And the second goal is to map out those air defenses so that missile strikes then become a much more, a greater chance of effect, right? So the drone strikes actually help exhaust the air defense and map it out, facilitating greater missile strikes later on both sides, because there's all sorts of rumors about the Kiev regime having restrictions lifted, and do they have the tourists? Do they not? What game is Meretz playing? We don't know about all of these things. So a lot of that's hanging in the air. But both sides are exchanging record drone strikes, and I think we can probably, with how massively drone production has been ramped up on both sides, with undoubtedly, even The Economist admitted this week, Russia is ahead, not just qualitatively, but quantitatively. The Kiev regime is still getting their licks in with drones, and their production numbers, even with distributed underground artisanal workshops instead of mass factory production, is still remarkably high. Between 2023 and 2024, Russian drone production jumped from 140,000 to 1.5 million, more than tenfold. And the jump from last year, from 1.5 million, Russia is probably going to produce somewhere around 4 million this year, at least, right? The Kiev regime is talking that Russia will be producing 300,000 FPV drones a month. 300,000 FPV drones a month this year. And Zelensky himself said that Russia will be producing 500 of their Garan long-range strike drones every day. Every day. So if they're producing 500 every day, you got to figure you're probably going to get hit with 400 or 500 at the least every day. This is the drone war of attrition, and it is just increasing, both tactically on the battlefield and strategically with these long-range strikes. So to the offensives, right? Sorry, long segue on drones. There was a lot of drone news this week, so I was suffused in drones. But on the offensives, okay, so Russia is exerting offensive pressure all along the contact line, right? Heavy everywhere. And part of the goal, again, war of attrition, is to spread the manpower of the Kiev regime out even further to exploit the shortage of manpower that they have relative to Russia, shortage of both quantity and increasingly of quality, as they rely ever more on forced conscripts and have less, trained and experienced personnel to fight. There's particularly big news about Russian. Again, I don't want to call it an offensive, because, technically you could consider it that way, but usually when we're talking, as far as I'm concerned, Russia is always on the offensive. They've been on the offensive since the Kiev regime failed Southern offensive, NATO planned offensive in the summer of 2023. I'd like to differentiate between constant attritional offensive pressure and a larger new injection of forces, often in a theater where it hasn't been seen before. So two of the things that the Kiev regime have been complaining loudly about as offensives this week are Russia with 50,000 troops entering the Sumy region, right? So we're talking the northern border between Russia and Ukraine. This really helps when you pull up a map if you're really interested, right? This is where we saw the Kursk incursion, the Belgorod incursions, and the like. On the Russian side, going from west to east, it's Bryansk, then the Kursk region, then the Belgorod region. On the Kiev regime side, it is Chernigov region, Sumy region, and then Kharkov region. And basically, because of the Kiev regime's incursions into Kursk, which was finally driven back, attempted incursions into Bryansk, and multiple attempted incursions into Belgorod, Putin has ordered the creation of a buffer zone created across all of the adjoining 3 Kiev regime territories. So Chernigov, Sumy, and Kharkov. And Putin has actually said it before, more than a year ago about Kharkov, but now he's including all 3 of these regions, and they're very serious about this. So they've got at least 50,000 in the Kursk region, now moving into the Sumy region. They've already taken somewhere upwards of half a dozen settlements in the Sumy region, and they're starting to pick the contact line up in Kharkov region again as well. Now, first of all, the Kiev regime complaining about Russian forces in Sumy. Well, you invaded Kursk. Russia pushes you out of Kursk. They've got a whole bunch of troops there that pushed you out of Kursk. It only makes sense to move them forward, along the contact line where they came from to prevent any further such incursions. So they don't get to complain about that at all. Same thing in the Kursk region, right? The movement into Kursk region by Russia was justified by the attacks, both missile strikes and the neo-Nazi definitively neo-Nazi incursions into Belgorod regions a couple of years in a row, actually. Now, 50,000 troops in both of these regions, it's not enough, anywhere near enough to take Kharkov city, Ukraine's second largest city, 2 million people, and 50,000 is nowhere even near enough, on a smaller scale, to take Sumy, which is a city of some 250,000 before the war. So at the moment, yes, the goal of these is to create buffer zones, right? You want to call this an offensive? Sure. It's not a big dramatic offensive. It's a slow grinding, pushing you back. One, to prevent you from making more incursions into this region, but there's also a reason for it related to the drone war, these long-range drone strikes, because the majority of those long-range drone strikes that have the capability of are targeting Moscow have to come from that northern Sumy area, because that's the shortest distance, marking near the maximum range of the Kiev regime's long-range drones. So by pushing them further back in Sumy, you push them increasingly further out of long-range drones that are capable of hitting Moscow. Now, there's always evolution in drones. Every few months, the evolution cycle is so ranges keep increasing, but it doesn't mean that you stop trying to push them back out of range. So the buffer zone that Russia is creating there, it's not going to be dramatic. They're not going to seize Sumy city. There's not going to be lightning tank advances. It is a grinding pushback to prevent incursions on the ground, like we saw in Kursk and Belgorod, but also to attempt to limit the amount and the capability of long-range strikes to hit Moscow and other vital centers like Kazan, where a number of Russia's most important military industrial complex facilities, including drone production, are.
Okay, that's so interesting. I know that, like you were saying, Putin has talked about this need for a buffer zone before, and now he's kind of bringing it up again. And it's also interesting to watch in all of the reports that we get here in the West from the establishment media here, right? They act as though they are so shocked that even though these talks are ongoing between Russia and Ukraine, Russia and the US, that Russia would still be continuing with these strikes, that they would still be amassing troops in any way, as if Russia is supposed to just approach the talks and then just say, okay, yeah, you know what, we're done with the war. We'll agree to whatever deal that you throw at us, when Russia has said the exact opposite, right? They're like, we're happy to talk, but this war is still going to continue. And there's still this focus by the media on the territory, right? On, oh, Russia hasn't gained that much land. But as you're pointing out there, it's also interesting to watch the ways in which they are really grinding down the Kiev's forces, and yet we see the West in this place where, sure, you've got, it was interesting to see Germany's brand new chancellor kind of playing his role and saying, oh, yeah, sure, these restrictions have been lifted. But what did you make of his statements and the fact that there are still these long-range strikes ongoing? So clearly, NATO, all of these key members in NATO are still directly involved.
Okay, so first of all, when it comes to this, thaw outrage that Russia is not giving the West the ceasefire they need to try to stabilize their proxy regime when their defenses, their front lines are crumbling everywhere. This is this game where we the outrage is probably real, but of course it is completely devoid of any history or context. Most wars, the wars continue while the diplomatic process starts. Oh, I don't know, the Vietnam War, where when the U.S. was attempting to negotiate their retreat out of Vietnam, the negotiations went on for years of conflict, right? That didn't stop them. The Korean War, even Trump's negotiated retreat of the U.S. from Afghanistan with the Taliban. The Taliban didn't give them a free card. Why? Because the side that is winning doesn't want to let off the pressure of the side that is losing, because that helps, that pressure helps leverage their diplomatic process, right? Of course. And we've also, of course, seen these ceasefires being used, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, the electrical infrastructure ceasefire, everything is always used and misused to pump more weapons, to conduct more forced conscription into the Kiev regime. I mean, so, no, that game is over. The Kremlin is not going to give the West a breather to repump more arms and give the Kiev regime a chance to forcibly conscript more people off the street like dogs. During the negotiation process, you can agree to our terms. If you don't, then the talks will continue, but the battlefield will continue, and that's because Russia has the leverage, and the Kiev regime and its Western backers don't have any cards to play. They've tried. I'm almost certain this big increase in long-range drone strikes over the last week was an attempt to push Russia towards the ceasefire that they have been saying no about for, I don't know, more than a year now at this point. It did not have that. If that was the goal, it did not have the desired effect at all. The answer is still niet. You will agree to our terms for a permanent settlement of this conflict on our terms, or we'll continue the pressure on the battlefield. And until you do cry uncle and agree to our terms, the pressure will continue. You don't get another breather. That's it.
And it's so crazy to me when you have countries like the UK, France, Germany talking about all of the troops that they want to flood Ukraine with as soon as there is a ceasefire. It's like, why would Russia agree to not only stop there and halt their own momentum, but then to take it a step further and be like, yeah, sure, NATO, have another chance at rebuilding Kiev's military. It's like it is not logical, but they continue to proceed in that way. And speaking of, I also thought it was interesting that the New York Times editorial board published an op-ed on Thursday. Their initial title, they tweaked it afterwards. So their current title is "If Trump Walks Away from Ukraine."
Narrative management.
Right. They say that he looks weak and Putin wins. Now, they added in that he looks weak after they published it, but they seem to expect Trump to do the Joe Biden, right? Add more sanctions on Russia, send more weapons to Ukraine, continue on with this war, keep Kiev on life support for as long as possible until Kiev crumbles, essentially. And they're really putting the pressure on Trump. But I mean, how do you view the Trump administration's handling of the conflict? We already are seeing a continuation of Biden's policies in multiple areas. So should we expect that to continue even as Kiev continues to be at a disadvantage, and even as the media continues to act like, oh, poor Ukraine, Russia is just bombing them left and right?
Yeah, so I actually think that people should read this. I hadn't read it until you pointed it to my attention myself. I could only suffer so much New York Times editorial board in a week. But anyway, so it's if Trump walks away from Ukraine now, Putin wins. Now, the first thing that struck me is the tone. This, coming from the New York Times, is one of the most complimentary portrayals of Trump, right? No orange man, blah, blah, blah. They were actually, well, Trump is right about this and this and this. But if he doesn't do this, then there'll be consequences. But my point is, they were trying to butter him up to win this argument with him. It was not necessarily an attack on him, but actually a complimentary appeal that he should adopt this policy. That smacks of a little bit of desperation there on their part, because the fourth estate in the United States is as politically and ideologically committed to this conflict as a part of the U.S. government, which is why it's called the fourth estate, as anything else has been. And that is a direct continuance from the Biden years, right? And if Trump, returns to the Brandon 2.0 policy of more ineffective sanctions, and do we have any weapons left on the shelf at all? We'll send those to that's essentially what they're demanding. Somehow that will increase the Kiev regime's diplomatic capability in negotiations. That's the way it is presented. Now, one of the constant copes in this, right? So we've moved from the Kiev regime is winning, right, to it's a stalemate. Now we are at, yes, Russia is winning, and yes, they're moving forward, but they're moving forward slowly, and it's at great cost. That Russia is suffering some type of massive casualties. Now, Russia's taking too many casualties. It's a war. There's no question. That's subjective, though. Objectively, compared to the Kiev regime, the reality of the situation that the Western mainstream media is still in complete denial about, but is self-evident from everything on the battlefield, is that Russia's casualties in comparison to the Kiev regimes are a fraction. So this game of advancing slowly at great cost, that is the new Ukraine is winning, right? It is a false narrative that they are clinging to like a life preserver with all of their might. But that will in time be punctured, and they'll be reaching for the next piece of Titanic driftwood or whatever is necessary to keep them afloat until this conflict is over. And then they'll find some excuse to blame it all on, like, oh, if only Biden had given all the weapons in the first week of the war, then, then it would have been completely, they'll try to blame it on something else. This New York Times editorial board was, yes, a plea for Trump to return to the Biden policy. And they're right, though. I mean, Trump is going to look weak, and certainly the New York Times will be one of the loudest ones braying about how weak he is if he walks away from this, right? If he doesn't walk away from this, and he returns to the Biden policy, Russia is still going to achieve the results. It might take a little bit longer, and Trump is still going to look weak. It's not a great situation. But if Trump were a smart man, which, okay, whatever, I know there's still some Trump fanboys out there. What he would do is walk away from this and blame Biden as loudly as possible. Never mind, of course, that he likes to brag all the time about, oh, he sent the javelins to Ukraine that were destroying Russian tanks, and the buildup of the CIA and the reorganization of the Kiev regime under U.S. control that happened all during his first administration. Never mind all that. But if he was smart, he would blame it all on Biden and try to walk away. But he probably won't be able to do that because there is too much institutional pressure against Russia and in favor of this conflict in the United States, in the media, in the intelligence services, in the security services, in the Pentagon, in the military-industrial complex, across the Atlantic in Europe. It's just too much. There will be too much pressure on him, and there will be this constant, you will look weak. You will be remembered as the man who surrendered Ukraine to Putin. If you want peace, you have to be strong. If you want to end the conflict, you've got to escalate to get there. And this is all, I mean, we can hear it all happening in real time, but it's been self-evident. And there's just too much. Trump is not strong enough. He doesn't have a strong enough team that has real opposition to this conflict. There's only a handful of them, right? And most of them are neocons and war hawks and everything. So I would like to see something opposite, but it's not going to happen. And Trump is more and more going to find himself sucked back into the Biden positions of, I don't know, he already bombed the Houthis like Biden did to no effect. and walked away from it. All of these games with Iran that probably still won't escalate to conflict, but just like Biden and Biden's policies in Ukraine as well, inevitably, step by step, Trump is finding himself trapped back into. Whether he ever really wanted to avoid them, or that's just part of his buffoonish mafia style deal making tactics, that's neither here nor there. In the end of the result, just as much for Trump as every other US president who takes the office, it is very, very hard to change the course of US interests and geopolitics, even to the slightest degree. And I remember George W. Bush saying that he wanted to get away from international involvement and focus on domestic things. Obama saying the same thing. And then, right up to Trump and Biden and today. To be fair, I don't think Biden ever said that he wants to stop focusing on international events.
Yeah, he may be the only one.
Yeah, he might be the only one. But, it's a repeat thing throughout US. And every 4 years that come around that a new president, the American electorate is fooled into thinking the same thing again, like Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football, and nothing ever changes. The pursuit of hegemony and primacy is hardwired into the U.S. state, no matter who the president is, and until there's some dramatic economic and political catastrophe in the United States that deeply shocks the entirety of the system, there is no real chance of change or changing course, even to more than a fraction of a degree.
Yeah, and I hope that people start learning that. I know that when Trump got into office, there was a lot of hope, right? There were a lot of people who said, no, he campaigned on this. He promised he was going to do this. He's going to let it be Biden's war. And we're only a few months in, and we're seeing the continuation of those policies. And yeah, I'm with you. When you've got the New York Times being like, hey, it's okay. We're harming Russia, right? Russia is paying a great cost. It's like that's wishful thinking in the same way that it was wishful thinking when they said that Kiev was winning.
That's another false narrative, by the way. As the U.S. General Cavioli, the Supreme Commander of NATO forces in Europe, has testified multiple times, the Russian our military is bigger, better trained, more combat experience, at the cutting edge of drone and other warfare. And their military industrial complex is kicked up to an unfathomable degree. Even the German defense minister Pistorius has admitted that Russia is producing far more at this point than they actually need for the SMO, and they're shelving it, right? So no, false narrative. This is not making Russia weaker. It's actually making Russia stronger economically as well. The Russian economy keeps growing. Is your economy kicking at 4%? No. Russia is getting stronger. And at the end of this, they're going to be still stronger and angry.
Yeah, and all of the U.S. and their allies that they do have, it's not looking too good for them. But hey, this is the fight that the U.S. picked, right? It did not have to be like this. In fact, Russia went to great lengths to try to make sure that we didn't get to this point, and they continued, they being the U.S., continued to poke the bear, and this is how we have gotten to this point. Certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I always appreciate you taking
a flurry of threats and ultimatums made at Russia. First, we have Putin should take the deal, the 30-day ceasefire deal that's been bandied along. Now, Trump's UN ambassador or acting UN representative John Kelly is saying this. We'll see in 2 weeks whether Putin is serious about peace. Those are the words of US President Donald Trump. But behind the ultimatums and the threats toward Putin is a stark reality for the US and the collective West. The battlefield situation is deteriorating, and unstable actors in Kiev and Germany are gearing up for unthinkable escalations via long-range missiles. If it's truly Trump's war now, can the United States afford to lose or concede? How will Russia respond when Taurus missiles are launched toward it? To answer all of this and more, we have, of course, two big friends of the show. We have Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer. His Substack is in the video description for all of you to check out after the show. Scott, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And then we have Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst. His website, Sonar21, is in the video description below where you can check out all of his work. Larry, good to see you again.
Boa tarde. Good afternoon.
All right. Well, let's get started, gentlemen. I wanted to first play. So, of course, I'm sure you all have been following Donald Trump's kind of war of words on social media. We have talks coming up between Russia and the parties involved in the Ukraine conflict. We're here in Ukraine, the United States, UK will all be attending, among others. But here's what Donald Trump had to say in response to questions on his recent comments toward Russia. Here we go.
Do you believe the Russians are being disrespectful when they say that your criticisms of Putin are simply an emotional response? And do you still believe that Putin actually wants to end the war?
I can't tell you that, but I'll let you know in about 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, we're going to find out very soon. We're going to find out whether or not he's tapping us along or not. And if he is, we'll respond a little bit differently, but it'll take about a week and a half, 2 weeks. We have Mr. Witkoff is here, who's doing a phenomenal job.
So I want to begin there and maybe kick it to you, Larry, to open. What is your reaction to all of this? Because on the one hand, we have Donald Trump and those in the Trump administration making comments like this. And then we have on the other talks and also escalations in this conflict that are quite significant. So wherever you want to begin.
Well, first of all, I've never heard the expression tapping us along. I've heard stringing us along. So, I don't know if Trump is just inventing a new term, but what it shows is, there are only two possibilities in all of this. Either Trump's staff is giving him the mushroom treatment, keeping him in the dark and covering him with manure, not telling him what's actually going on, or he knows what's actually happened and he's lying. There's no gray area here. When Trump came out last Sunday, blasting Putin is crazy for launching all these unjustified missile and drone strikes for no good reason, and that killed lots of civilians. All of that was false. In the 7 days prior to Putin and the Russians launching 548 drones and 83 ballistic missiles, Ukraine had sent around 1,400 drones into Russia. So it's not like Putin got up one morning and says, I feel like bombing me some Ukrainians. No, that's not what happened. And then when you looked at the casualties that were caused by 548 drones and 83 ballistic missiles, at least civilian casualties by Ukraine itself was reported as 30. So either Russia was actually targeting military installations, or they're terrible shots. They have terrible marksmanship. The Russians reacted like mature adults. They didn't want to say anything to embarrass Trump. They were suggesting that maybe he didn't properly understand it. And in fact, he hinted at that when Trump was asked by a reporter about the failed assassination attempt on Putin with helicopters or with drones while he was in a helicopter flying to Kursk. And Trump said, "Oh, I haven't heard of that. Maybe, that could be a reason." You think? And so I've speculated what Trump and Putin's next conversation will be like, where Putin will say, "Well, Mr. President, you appear that your staff did not properly inform you what was happening. Let me explain." And like a good lawyer that he is, he'll go through it chapter and verse, and it'll probably conclude with something. And I now know exactly how you feel when you were subject to an assassination attempt. I was too. Now, he's not going to say anything about the fact that it was probably carried out with U.S. assistance, but Putin is going to maintain the high road, not going to be confrontational, not going to be insulting. Here's Trump who, he talks a big game, but he's not in a position to deliver anything.
Scott, I want to bring you in here and just react to what Larry said in conjunction with when I look at how Russia has been responding. I mean, an assassination attempt on Putin, that's very serious stuff. And the escalations, of course, continue in this conflict despite the U.S.-Russia talks. But at the same time, Russia's attitude has been exactly as what Larry said, incredibly professional. And it's almost as if they are moving like water throughout all of this, to use that, Sun Tzu phrase. Scott, your reaction to all this?
Well, first of all, let's just focus, because I don't want people to trivialize the attack that took place against President Putin while he was in Kursk. Both the nuclear doctrine of the United States and the nuclear doctrine of Russia hold that if anybody challenges or attacks or seeks to neutralize the command and control of strategic resources, namely nuclear launch, command and control, that will trigger an immediate nuclear retaliation, because it'll be deemed that our strategic nuclear deterrence is under attack. The tip of the command and control of the nuclear command and control is the president of Russia and the president of the United States. That's why our president has the little briefcase guy flown around with them. The Russians have their briefcase guy. So I just want everybody to understand that this attack against Putin, had it succeeded, would probably almost certainly resulted in a nuclear conflict between Russia and the United States and NATO. You don't get to kill the president of a nuclear armed power and walk away from it. That just is the way it is. And because this wasn't an action carried out by Ukraine singularly, meaning Ukraine was assisted in one way or another by intelligence and technologies provided by NATO nations. Britain may have taken the lead on this one, but I'm not absolving the United States of guilt. We would have been knowledgeable of this, and since we didn't move to prevent it, we therefore are complicit. This is the level of stupidity that exists. It's the kind of stupidity that we saw during the Biden administration that almost took us to the brink of a nuclear war last December. But again, I don't want to. I don't want people saying, "Well, it's a Scott Ritter saying things all over again." Hey, screw you. I mean, I really get fed up with people who spout ignorance. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. We came so very goddamn close to dying last December because of ignorance people like you who didn't understand what Biden was doing by authorizing the extension of the range of the ATACMS missiles in relation to a newly promulgated Russian nuclear doctrine, which gave them the green light to respond. Russia said, we have a green light now to respond. And I don't know what they would have done if Donald Trump hadn't come out and distanced himself from that policy. That bought us time to cool the jets until Trump became president, and we avoided a nuclear conflict. Now we have a situation where out of the blue, Putin's helicopter is attacked while Putin's there by a Ukrainian drone swarm. If you don't understand how close you came to dying, then your brain doesn't function. So this is very serious what we're talking about here. This isn't kids play. This isn't, all this. And the fact that Donald Trump was not cognizant of this shows that he's not in control of his policy. And therein lies the problem.
Makes it worse.
You speak of Russia and how their response. I believe Russia's already made the determination that this war will end violently. There will be no peace negotiation because the United States is incapable of this. Let's just look at it from a simplistic structural standpoint. Marco Rubio has acknowledged that the conflict is a proxy war between the United States and Russia, and Ukraine is the proxy acting on behalf of the United States. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, has said this. So if you're waging a proxy war, and we are still waging this proxy war, we have not stopped waging this proxy war, how can we be the innocent peace negotiator? All we want is for people to stop dying. Please stop killing people. No. From the Russian perspective, everything America's asking Russia to do is to the benefit of America and its policies, which are being manifested in this proxy conflict. So the Russians have no illusions whatsoever about what's going on. They will play the game, and they'll do what needs to be done to put the pieces in place. But they know at the end of the day, this administration is incapable, as currently configured, to create the conditions for a successful negotiation to peace. So this peace process will collapse. And Russia's okay with that because they're winning the war. They're going to win the war. They're going to achieve everything they want through force of arms anyways. What's important to Russia, though, is to keep the dialogue between Russia and the United States ongoing. To let Trump walk away from the peace process as a futile effort, but to keep the dialogue between the United States and Russia ongoing, to reinforce the reality that it's more important for Russia and the United States to maintain some sort of diplomatic decorum than it is for the United States to successfully negotiate an end to a conflict on terms unacceptable to Russia. There's a reason why Russia initiated the special military operation. They're grounded in what Russia calls the root causes of this conflict. And until those root causes are sufficiently addressed, there will be no peace.
Yeah, Larry, jump right in.
Well, the question of the so-called long-range missiles, it's not the distance that the Taurus covers that's the issue. My understanding, and Scott will correct me if I'm off base, is that the Taurus, unlike Storm Shadow, unlike the ATACMS, does have the potential to carry a nuclear warhead. That's what Russia's worried about. The distance of the Taurus is like 300 miles. Its capability to cover from point A to point to destination. Well, from Kharkiv, which is like right up on the border of Russia, that's 400 miles to Moscow. So that means that even the Taurus is not going to reach Moscow. But what it does signal is if the West decides to go down that path, then if you're a Russian general in the general staff, you can't assure Putin, there's no way they put a nuke on that. You want to take that chance? So Russia's going to have to assume the worst. And they made it very clear that not only are they going to strike the launch point of the Taurus, but they're going to go after the people who made the Taurus, which means Rheinmetall in Germany. I don't know if they're based in Berlin or Frankfurt or Stuttgart, where they are, but they'll get hit with an Oreshnik. So again, this would then dramatically escalate. Russia's insistence, as Scott noted, on the root causes is almost entirely about NATO and the expansion of NATO to the east. So Russia's going to make sure that stops for good. But Russia is also dealing now with escalating provocations from the West up in the Baltic Sea, where they're trying to stop Russian ships. And there's been some, tit for tat up there, but basically now the Russians are sending what are so-called ghost ships. And that just means these are tankers and supply vessels that are not insured by London. They're now insured by a Russian insurance agency, and that they're going to get a military escort until they're out of the Baltic Sea. So, this is another flashpoint that's there, but I think, Russia's come to the decision, and I agree with Scott, that they're going to go through, they're not just going through the motions with these attempts to negotiate, but they're not going in blind. And they're not going in saying, oh my God, we got to negotiate. This is our only way out. Oh, heavens no. They're militarily better equipped and prepared to defeat Ukraine and NATO than at any time prior to today. I would just note in passing that, there's some in the West want to criticize Russia. Oh, they're losing millions and they can't keep this up. I would simply note that Russia is recruiting right now, on average per month, 40,000 soldiers. The U.S. Department of Defense had its thumbs in its suspenders and was so proud last month because they've reached their recruiting goal for the year, 50,000. So basically, the United States is happy to recruit in 1 month or in 1 year what Russia does in 1 month. I mean, it just shows you the delusional state of this entire matter.
Can I just jump, because you had asked the question about the Taurus, and because my brain is fried, I just forgot to answer the question. On the Taurus, there's some political aspect to this as well, and I think the media has gotten the story completely wrong. I don't believe there are any Taurus missiles being sent to Ukraine. I know people have said 150 were secretly sent. Zelensky's whispering, Merz is whispering, and all this. Boris Pistorius is the Minister of Defense of Germany. He was the Minister of Defense under Scholz too, but because Merz had to reconstitute a coalition government that incorporates elements of the previous government, I believe Pistorius carried over. But in the interim between the election and Merz becoming chancellor, Merz was out there saying things about, I'm going to green light Taurus. Taurus is going to be flowing. I'm going to make all this happen. And Pistorius came out and said, nah, that just isn't going to happen. And he said something interesting. He said, there are reasons why we didn't send Taurus in the previous government. And these reasons will hold today, and we will never send Taurus in the next government. This is a definitive statement by the Minister of Defense. And the reason I believe is quite clear, even though it's been unspoken by all parties, is that when Germany was talking about sending Taurus, the Russians sent a signal that basically said that the Taurus is a red line, and if the Taurus arrives in Ukraine, that Germany will be targeted, and that the decision has been made, the targets have been selected, and all they need is for the Germans to hit the play button. That there will be no debate, no discussion, no warning. It just will happen. And then this was further reinforced by the Russian use of the Oreshnik against the Dnipro facility in Ukraine. That attack, I believe, was linked to the threats given to Germany, signaling that Russia had the capacity to strike Germany in a way that nobody could intercept, and that the destruction of German facilities would be inevitable. And this is what Pistorius meant when it's not going to happen. So when Merch comes out and starts doing his mealy mouth, we have agreed to lift all restrictions, what he was saying apparently was that Germany now has aligned its policy. Because you remember when the United States lifted restrictions on ATACMS, and England and France both, lifted the restrictions on Scalp and Storm Shadow. The Germans said we're not agreeing to this. What he's saying now is that our policy now conforms with the policy of our allies back in the fall of 2024. And people said, well, that means that Taurus is being delivered. No. What's happening is that Germany is delivering Taurus-related technology to Ukraine. It was originally discussed back then. I think now Zelensky and Merz have finalized whatever agreement has been made, and that Germany will begin assisting Ukraine in the creation of a manufacturing base that can produce long-range cruise missiles. These are alleged to have ranges of over 2,000 kilometers, which puts Moscow well into the strike radius. And that this will, these cruise missiles will have, German technology, and Germany is saying Ukraine can do whatever they want with this technology. Now, immediately saw some backpedaling in Germany. I believe Pistorius got another phone call that said, you do understand that if German technology hits Moscow, we hit Germany. This is just stupidity on the part of Merz. I don't know what muscles he thinks he's flexing. I don't know why he's doing it at this point in time. But I think the Russians have gained so much confidence recently because of the inability of the West to show political unity. The threat of Article 5 protection, it no longer exists. I don't believe the United States is in a position where they're willing to trade Boston for Dusseldorf. Dusseldorf, of course, is where the Rheinmetall plant is, and Dusseldorf factory would be annihilated by non-nuclear Oreshnik missiles. Germany would scream bloody murder, but at that point in time, I believe many nations, including the United States, would say you embarked on a unilateral policy outside of the framework of NATO decision-making authority, so therefore the Article 5 protections don't extend to you, and we're not going to come to your defense. We believe that the Russians, although we condemn what they've done, it was legitimate self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. And I think Germany is being schooled on this reality right now, that they aren't going to be able to look to NATO and the United States as a backup. And because this isn't the Biden administration, Trump isn't going to go to war for NATO. Trump isn't going to allow the United States to be destroyed by Russian nuclear missiles. Our Golden Dome isn't built yet. So I think Germany's gotten way ahead of its skis here, and is doomed to have one of these classic, grand mal crashes and downhill skiing that we're seeing. There's just stupidity in the extreme.
Larry, why now then? Given everything that Scott said, why did Germany, do you feel, it embarked on this incredibly reckless policy decision?
Did you ever see the movie Titanic, Danny?
Yes, I did. I was
Okay,
very
wow.
young and it was very long. But
Do you remember that scene when everybody got into the water and was drowning and thrashing around? That's
yes.
Germany, okay? They realized the ship is sinking, and the desperation that seized not just Germany, but all of Europe, and to an extent some of the neocon class here in Washington. We're getting in a relentless drumbeat of, oh my God, the Russian economy is collapsing. They're gonna go any minute now, and oh, they're losing millions of people, and oh, a million of, there's no way they can continue. It's just like, we keep lying to ourselves instead of stepping back and saying, okay, let's take an honest, objective assessment of where the war stands. And the Russia's pace of operations, ops tempo, has accelerated, not decelerated. Their capture of territory has accelerated, not decelerated. The capability of the Ukrainians to stop Russian advances is nil. Well, there are certain areas where they're putting up a pretty stout defense. But again, that's going to collapse because the Russians are smartly not hitting them head on with mass wave meat assaults. They are working around the periphery. They're creating what they know are called cauldrons, basically trying to encircle, but wisely always leaving sort of an escape path out. But they are not taking on these settlements head on to create their own casualties, but they're still inflicting incredible casualties on the Ukrainians. That it's gone up dramatically compared to, say, the prior year. So in response to this, the West is trying to figure out what to do. And
we salute the Spiritual Rising for getting her membership. Revolutionary Way of Life. Absolutely appreciate the love, Queen. Salute.
And I think, here's Trump trying to figure, how to bail out of this crashing plane. And Trump is actually caught a bit in the middle, because when you look at the members of Congress that are the most vocal proponents of aid to Ukraine and of inflicting economic sanctions on Russia, those same senators and members of the House, I know from an investigation that's underway, have received millions of dollars from the Ukrainians. One of the most prominent Republican senators in this regard, he's gotten $17.3 million. A very prominent Democrat, I was told, he's gotten like $23 million. So this is actually now under active investigation. Yet the Trump White House is threatened with a bipartisan bill of 81 senators with bone-crushing sanctions. And so no matter what Trump does, he still faces the prospect that these bought and paid for politicians are still going to try to sandbag him. So, and at the same time, and this spills over into the whole question of Gaza and Iran, if Trump does anything that alienates the AIPAC crowd, again, he needs votes to get his big, beautiful bill done. And if they start saying, hey, we're not going to support your big, beautiful bill if you're going to go off on these foreign policy larks that are going to undermine American interests. So it's pretty complicated.
Just a second, Danny. I'm on my bank account. I apologize. I just said, Slava Ukraina. Come on, guys. Oh, there it is. Wow, it worked. Okay, I'm a rich man. $17 million. All right, baby. Thanks, Larry, for that tip. I knew I was doing something wrong in my business model.
Yeah.
Can I just add something on the tactics, because it's so the number. I hate talking casualty ratios and all that kind of stuff, but Russia's always had an advantage. But I just want to bring up a couple things. One, the Russians have said that they have mobilized 175,000 men since the beginning of the year. And that right now they're bringing in 40,000 a month, in terms of volunteers, contract to that. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, are just struggling. They in the period of time between the beginning of the year now, maybe 25, maybe 30,000. But the casualty rates are unreal on the front lines. The Russians right now, according to the Ukrainians, have not let up on any part. Normally what would happen is that the Russians, for instance, if they advance toward Pokrovsk, the Ukrainians would concentrate troops, throw drone waves at them, and then stop the Russians. The Russians be forced to go to the flanks and make an adjustment. There'd be a pause as the Russians pulled back, re-equipped, and then began going. Right now, the Ukrainians say there is no pause on any aspect of the front. The Russians are pushing forward. What this means is that whatever casualties Ukrainians are inflicting on the Russians are being immediately replaced, and the ops tempo continues forward. This means that whatever casualties they're inflicting are very low, very low. Now let's talk about, this misperception of Russian human wave tactics. I had a very interesting conversation with several Russian officers who were involved in, these things. The way Russia's fighting this war right now is that they are in total control of the battlefield. I could not survive on this battlefield because I'd come in and talk about putting a company online, advance in fire team rushes, squads moving here, there, and everywhere, and my Marines would be slaughtered by drones because I've provided this target and the drones come in and hit. The Russians speak in terms of what they call 3s and 6s. And so the basic assault group of the Russian army is a 3-man assault element. And that means that they take a piece of terrain suitable for 3 men. Now, to take that terrain, they isolate it with firepower, they punish it with firepower, they cut it off with drones, and then 3 men come in under the close direction of command and control overseen by a drone. They're literally told, move left, move right, there, this, that, and the other thing, stop. Drone support comes in, and they take a position. That's the 3s. Then the 6s come in and take control of the position, and then they consolidate, they bring in ammunition, they hold, they rotate, fresh unit comes in, this unit goes back, and they repeat the process, 3s and 6s. While they're doing this on the front, going up to 40 kilometers in the rear, the Russians are swarming drones, nothing moves. If nothing moves, no reinforcements come in. If no reinforcements come in, the Ukrainians stand no chance on the front line. The casualty ratios today between the Russians and Ukrainians are 20 to 1. 20 to 1. When the 3-man element comes in, it's taking on a Ukrainian defensive position that's has between 5 and 11 Ukrainians in it. Most of them are being killed by the artillery coming in or stunned. The 3s come in and take their prisoners. They may take 4 or 5 guys prisoner. The 6s come in, consolidate, and withdraw them. But there are occasions as the 3s come in, a Ukrainian drone gets through, hits them, and that's a bad day for the 3. They're dead. Because when you're 3 guys out there, there ain't nobody coming to your rescue. You're going to die. You're going to get hit. Maybe people come in later on and try to evacuate you, but it's a bad day. But 3 dead is different than, 30 or 40 or 50 dead, which you would suffer if it was a Marine Corps assault. The Russians aren't providing the Ukrainians with the targets necessary to inflict high numbers of Russian casualties. The Russians have taken control of this entire front line, and they are dictating the pace of operations using 3s, 6s, and drones. And it's game, set, match. The Russians can repeat this algorithm all day long. As long as the Ukrainians can't reinforce adequately, this war is over.
Yeah, Larry, I wanted to, given what Scott just said there, because I think those are really important points. Talk about what's, the New York Times just said that Russia is now launching its offensive, and you've had Zelensky freaking out about just 50,000 troops. And what Scott said, there's been even more of a amassing of these troops. And then you have reports from Ukraine itself about desertions to just such a significant degree. Talk about this offensive. What is the New York Times blowing something out of proportion, or is there something really serious about to happen, given the reality we spoke of earlier, which is that Russia has apparently made the decision that this is going to end violently?
No, I think Russia kicked off the offensive once they consolidated Kursk in March. So this is, just Western media is late to catch up to it. And it's not that Russia wants to do violence for violence sake, but they recognize that they cannot point to a single agreement that the United States has made with Russia that the United States has honored. And in fact, they've been repeatedly lied to by both Republican and Democrat presidents over the last 35 years, since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Putin, in particular, has admitted that he was entirely too trusting of some of the promises. In fact, I know Putin, when he was being interviewed by Oliver Stone for Oliver Stone's outstanding 4-part series with Putin, Putin noted that the mistake that was made by Gorbachev was that he accepted a verbal assurance from James Baker and didn't get it in writing. But even if it's put in writing, there's no guarantee that the West is going to comply and follow through. So that's why, Russia, while hoping that they could speak and reasonably and get the attention of the West, I think has acknowledged that the ultimate road forward here is going to be a military victory. The only negotiation will be the kind of negotiation that took place at Stalingrad when von Paulus surrendered the Sixth Army to the Soviets. It's going to be the same kind of dialogue negotiation that took place when Admiral Donitz surrendered Nazi Germany to the Allies on May 8th. So, this is going to end in a military victory for Russia. And it's not only going to be a victory over Ukraine, it's going to be a victory over NATO. And it's going to, I think, further exacerbate the tensions that already exist in NATO as they realize, they're good at talking trash, but they can't deliver it or pick it up.
Yeah, and Scott, a lot has been made. You had Dmitry Medvedev make a comment on X where he talked about the buffer zone essentially extending all the way out to the entirety, essentially, of Ukraine should these provocations and escalations continue. But at the same time, there is a move right now by Russia to establish a significant buffer zone in reaction to these drone swarms you've been talking about and other incursions into its territory. Talk about the significance of this in lieu of what the Western mainstream media, especially the New York Times, now is talking about with this offensive.
Well, first of all, the bad news for Ukraine and the West is, there's an old saying: the Russians are slow to harness, quick to ride. Vladimir Putin's government has behaved in a very balanced, controlled fashion, opening itself up to much criticism from within Russia as being too slow, not decisive, things of that nature. But the reality is that Russia doesn't take action until Russia has put all of the resources together to achieve a result. Putin himself has acknowledged that the early days of the SMO, they weren't ready for the $48 billion infusion of capital and resources that came after the peace talks collapsed. Russia, I believe, had placed too much faith into getting Ukraine to accept the terms of conflict resolution through the Istanbul communique. And when that collapsed, Russia was left basically holding a bag. And the evidence of that is, for instance, the decision to engage Wagner in a contract. That contract is dated in May of 2022. That means that Russia wasn't envisioning a need to use Wagner in a massive combat role, and that there was a gap in Russian capabilities that required Russia to turn to a Wagner-like organization. So Russia wasn't prepared, and Russia really didn't get prepared for the reality of this war until after the offensive of September, October of 2022, which compelled Russia, I guess it started maybe even August, compelled Russia to mobilize 300,000 and reset the conflict. And since that time, Russia's been resetting the conflict. First of all, stabilizing the conflict through defensive warfare, mobilization of their defense industry, and the initiation of a strategic air campaign that people have paid little reference to. I mean, everybody talks about what goes on the front line. Nobody talks about the fact that Russia has destroyed NATO air defense. I mean, NATO poured in everything it's got into Ukraine to build this unbeatable, impenetrable air defense umbrella. That's gone. Russia has depleted it, destroyed it. Russia has air dominance right now. The Russians are deploying. Some say they have the potential of deploying up to 500 of the Jiran, the Shahed 138 analogs over Ukraine, and these are advanced models using low low cross section materials to reduce their radar visibility. They have AI built in. They have their target designators and their target acquisition cameras. This isn't the old drone that came in the washing machine or the the motor scooter. These are modern drones coming in, and they're devastating. And nothing can stop them. Ukraine has run out. They have no more Italian missiles, no more French missiles. The Patriots are depleted. They've got nothing. And this is because of the strategic air campaign planned by Russia to overwhelm the most concentrated air defense network in the world, which NATO put in place in Ukraine and now has been effectively destroyed. Nobody talks about that. But so Russia has all the pieces in place right now to move forward. Russia has said that the 4 territories that it acquired when through the referendum of September 2022 are constitutionally Russian. They will belong to Russia. The bad news for Ukraine and the West is that Russia won't stop this war until it has those territories. The even worse news is that Russia put Ukraine on notice that if it doesn't accept, and this, I think the red line is this coming negotiation. This is Ukraine's last chance. Accept peace or 4 more. And Medinsky isn't lying. The Russians don't lie. They don't bluff. They don't play games. They're slow to harness, but once they make that decision, quick to ride. So we're on the verge of seeing Russia say we're taking 4 more territories. But in addition to that, Russia said we're building a buffer zone that Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kharkov that protect the territories of Russia, Belgorod, Kursk, and Orel, I believe, from Ukrainian attack. Having said this, because Russia's hinted at this in the past, having said this, this will happen. And that's a bad news for American negotiators, because this just throws in another layer of complexity. Because now, in addition to getting Ukraine to withdraw from 4 territories, Ukraine will have to cede a probably 150-kilometer buffer zone where it will not be allowed to have any military resources at all. This will happen. I'm just telling you right now that once Russia commits to something, they don't come back. The time to avoid that was the last round of negotiations. Ukraine didn't. They escalated the issue. They launched attacks, and now Russia is making advances. And according to the news, Zelensky was in Germany, supposed to meet with von der Leyen or somebody for some high-level, schmooze, and he had to leave because the Russians had broken through in Sumy and were threatening the town of Sumy itself. The Russians ain't quitting. This counteroffensive, it's going to be about not just the buffer zone, but it's going to be about new territories as well. And the Russians have the resources to do this. And remember, every day that the Ukrainians get weaker, the Russians get stronger. That 175,000 men that they mobilized, these aren't combat replacements, because Russia isn't suffering those kind of casualties. These are the troops that are going into 2 new armies that have been equipped, trained, and prepared to be brought in for the next wave of offensive, joining existing armies that have been pulled back and re-equipped and trained. So we're talking about Russia having the ability to, deploy upwards of 200,000 troops where they see fit, and Ukraine doesn't have the ability to match that.
Yeah, Larry, Russia's capabilities, as Scott just outlined, are just astounding in many respects. And one of the ways I see this also being communicated in the Western mainstream media is that as Donald Trump made these comments about Putin playing with fire, and the media asking him, well, how is he playing? How are you going to respond to that? A lot of the pontification in the Western mainstream media has been almost solely focused on economic retaliation toward Russia for supposedly to blame for continuing this conflict, trying to put the blame on Putin and Russia. What's your reaction to this? Because it seems like this is where the NBC, for example, NBC News just came out with a report. This is how Donald Trump can exercise leverage, and you won't find anything militarily in there at all with regard to leverage. So your thoughts about that?
Well, the ignorance about Russia's economic capability is profound, widespread. Russia is the only country in the world that could build a wall around itself and operate a sound economy. Would not require a single import from any other country to do so. Not even the United States can do that. We'd be in sort of second place, but we still need the rare earth minerals that China processes. Yeah, if we had built our own processing plants in here, we might not need that, but we haven't. And doing such is like at least a 5-year process. So Russia does not need the West or the United States. It would like to have a relationship with them because, in fact, the West and the United States do need things out of Russia: fertilizer, uranium. So this myth that all we've got to do is put enough pressure on the Russian economy and it's going to collapse, it's resurfaced of late. It's very popular. I'm just having an email debate with some fellow who thinks himself a grand expert, but and insists, oh, Russia's going to collapse any minute, and oh, Putin's going to be under great pressure. Yeah, which this is a little bit of a deviation, but let me go to this point that the West seems obsessed in a way that it never was with any of the Soviet leaders, whether Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Andropov, Yeltsin, that if only they got rid of that one guy, they got rid of the one guy, we just got to get rid of Putin, things will be okay. And I'm thinking, do they not read Medvedev's tweets? I'd keep track of Medvedev's social media campaign, because if Putin's out of the picture and Medvedev's in the command seat,
that's a fact to be deleted.
All of a sudden, you're going to have a vastly different, more aggressive Russia, and that's attributable to the fact that I think Putin is a much better lawyer than Medvedev. Medvedev also is a lawyer by training, but Putin is very much more cerebral and stays very logical and rational. Medvedev's a passionate guy and can get emotional about some of these things. And so, then the West would really be in a pickle. So this failure across the board to understand the transformation that's taken place in Russia under Putin's leadership since 1999, it's a miracle story, because people I know that were in Russia back in 1998, 1997, when the longevity was dropping from 63 among men to 56, where only 7% of the population could be considered middle class. The other sort of 92% were in poverty. Russia has literally been pulled out of a latrine, of an outhouse, and out of the sewage, and has risen to become modern, clean, prosperous, with the middle class now being constitute about 52% of the population. So some dramatic changes, and the Russians are still young enough to remember what this means, and the West continues to miscalculate on this front.
Yeah, and Scott,
I just add on the
sure.
on the Medvedev thing, because this is depressing conversation, so I just want to throw something in humorous. Medvedev is Sonny in The Godfather, and and Putin is Don Corleone. And just remember, Don Corleone, what he told Michael: the one that comes to you about Barzani, he's the traitor. Remember that. And then what happened? Everybody died. And it wasn't Sonny that killed them. Everybody else. Putin is Don Corleone. He's in total control. It's not personal. It's business. Whereas Medvedev, everything's personal. I mean, his tweets, I read them. I enjoy them. But this is Sonny, and we know what happened to Sonny. He ended up in a New Jersey, toll booth, getting blown away by a bunch of guys with machine guns. Putin's not going to let that happen to him, although he ended up in a helicopter in Kursk. But the point is, I think we need to keep in mind that Putin isn't just a lawyer. He's a stone cold killer. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that this is a man who is prepared to do what is necessary to protect Russia. But he always keeps the interests of the family at heart. He's not going to sacrifice the family, but anybody who threatens the family is going to end up sleeping with the fishes.
Well, Scott, maybe elaborate on that, because is this Vladimir Putin's biggest crime? Because I think even Donald Trump himself is falling into what Larry was just talking about, this obsession with Putin, this obsession with this particular leader. And it appears that, this is just continuing on and on and on to the point where, these escalations are so dramatic and explosive. So is this Putin's biggest crime, the fact that he is the leader who is protecting Russia, as you said, and is willing to do whatever it takes to ensure Russia's continued stability and sovereignty?
Well, let me put it this way. Vladimir Putin knows the United States of America better than Donald Trump does. And Vladimir Putin knows Russia 400 times better than not just Donald Trump, but the totality of his Russian advisors, which means that Vladimir Putin is very much in control of the situation. I gave Donald Trump 100 days. I held my tongue. Hell, I spoke out in defense of this. I said he's the president of the United States. I wish him well. He has vision. He wants to implement this vision. And as I watched him imperfectly go out there, I gave him the benefit of the doubt across the board, including Russia. But now's the time to speak honestly. Donald Trump is the most incompetent man to rule the White House. Joe Biden wasn't incompetent. Joe Biden was just brain dead. As much as I disagreed with Joe Biden's policy formulations, et cetera, Joe Biden, when his brain worked, could never be called incompetent. He could be called stupid, foolish, all that, but never incompetent. Trump is just pure 100% incompetent. Whatever successes he enjoys isn't because of him, but because of things that his subordinates do, namely Steve Witkoff, who has gone out and performed miracle after miracle after miracle, only to be undermined by Marco Rubio, Trump's Secretary of State, Keith Kellogg, Trump's moron in chief for Ukrainian negotiations, Scott Bessent, who continues to believe somehow that we can strangle Russia economically, although I challenge Bessent to point Russia out on a map, let alone Russia's oil fields, and to discuss the complexity of how Russia generates oil-derived income, the various methodologies used to get that oil to market, and why you'll never strangle Russia, even if you seek to impose 500% tariffs on those nations important. You're really going to tariff India, who just this month bought more oil from Russia than ever before, or China, who has reconfigured its energy configuration so that it is very much dependent upon Russian oil. What, China's now going to go, oh God, should have had a V8. We're not going to do that anymore. 500% tariff. China's not going to balk. Trump's going to find himself boxed into a rhetorical corner yet again and have to back down. Trump doesn't know what he's doing. That's the problem. And, even Witkoff is only as good as the direction he gets. Witkoff has a capability of sitting down with the Russians, listening, which is a skill set that Donald Trump simply doesn't have, absorbing, another skill set Donald Trump doesn't have, comprehending, another skill set Donald Trump doesn't have, and then able to put forward the byproduct of that process to say, this is the Russian reality. If you remember early on in this process, when Russia and the United States first began discussing, one of the things that I really liked was the fact that every one of the Trump administration officials, even Marco Rubio, said this is a reality-based discussion. And that's the importance of the dialogue. But Trump doesn't live in a reality-based world. He lives in Trump world, where he believes that he can come in and put pressure on people and have them fold like a house of cards and influence. Vladimir Putin will never fold with Donald Trump. And Trump should know this. I'm not an expert in body language reading. I mean, Larry, that, we all pretend to be back in the old days, of Kremlin watching, oh my God, Brezhnev died. Who's standing next to Andropov? Who's wearing a hat? Who's wearing the scarf? What's going on? It means so much. It means nothing. But that's how we operate. With Trump, this guy, he doesn't know anything about Russia at all, and nobody around him knows anything about Russia. There are no Russian experts. Tulsi Gabbard, God bless her soul, is not a Russian expert. Doesn't know anything about Russia. Larry has spent more time in Russia, having more quality interaction with the Russians than I would imagine the CIA's top Russia man. The CIA's top Russia man or person, could be a female nowadays, is driven by, because you don't get to be the CIA's top Russian person today by being a genuine expert in Russia. You get it by playing the ideological game. It means that somewhere along the line, you went and got an advanced degree and you wrote a thesis that said Vladimir Putin is an evil autocrat and the enemy of democracy. That's what Fiona Hill did. That's what this Andrea Taylor person did. This is what they all do. This is how they made their reputation. They wrote a PhD thesis, said Vladimir Putin's the most evil man in the world and we have to get rid of him. Oh, you're perfect. Come in and work for the CIA. They don't know anything about Russia. They haven't been to Russia. They can't comprehend Russia. They might be able to speak Russian, but they don't speak to Russians. I will tell you this. I've had more quality interaction with Russian military officers than the entire Defense Intelligence Organization in the last 2 years. Because I have the gall to attend Russian embassy functions where I have developed a good rapport with the defense attaché and his officers. We don't talk about anything. We drink vodkas, we shoot the shit. But the point is, I have a better rapport, better interaction, and a better ability to, ascertain Russian opinions, which should be the function of the Defense Intelligence Agency and our defense attaché office. But we don't do it. We don't engage. We don't talk with them. So we're ignorant about them. Donald Trump is hostage to a system that long ago forgot to do what's necessary to be Russian experts. What we have now are a bunch of Russophile or Russophobic, intellectually damaged propagandists. And if you're advised at the highest levels by these people, you'll never understand what the Russians are trying to communicate to you, and you'll never be able to exploit advantages as they might appear in the process of the negotiations. Trump has doomed himself to failure. Vladimir Putin will win. Again, we get to body language. This is why I brought it up. You remember when Trump met with Vladimir Putin in, was it Helsinki back in 2018, I think, 2019 maybe? And they went into the back room and Trump got in trouble because he brought, one interpreter, but, nobody else was there to take notes. And he came out. When they came out and they came to give a joint press conference, Putin comes out totally in control. I mean, he is just Dapper Don, cock of the walk, walking up to the microphone. And I'm not a body language expert. I'm going, there's a man that feels good about what just happened and is confident in himself. Trump came out hunched, head down, defeated, and he comes to them and he had no self-confidence. Whatever he tried, what stunt he tried to pull with Putin didn't work. I'm not saying Putin owns him. I'm not saying that Trump is, somehow been compromised. I'm saying that Donald Trump cannot go head to head with Vladimir Putin and win, because Vladimir Putin's stronger, smarter, more intelligent, quicker, knows his stuff, and at the end of the day, isn't dumber than dirt. And Donald Trump is dumber than dirt. He simply doesn't know what he's doing. He's a prisoner of his own rhetoric, a prisoner of his own ego. And if we're not careful, it could get us involved in a war with Russia, which is the last thing Russia wants and is the last thing America needs.
Yeah, Danny, let me follow up with what Scott has said. Donald Trump speaks English, barely. Vladimir Putin speaks Russian, German, and English. He can carry on conversations in English, maybe not as smoothly as Lavrov, but close to it. If you've never watched the Oliver Stone 4-part series, his hour-long interview, 4 hours of interviews with Vladimir Putin that were recorded between 2015 and the end of 2016, please do. Any of your viewers, go to YouTube, look it up. Please watch it, because it gives you a real measure of the quality of man, human being, that Vladimir Putin is. That he is not a megalomaniac. He's not requiring everybody to be around and tell him what a great guy he is, what a genius he is, how smart he is. He is capable of self-deprecating humor. And on the body language front, there's in the fourth part of this series, Oliver Stone is really grilling him on, hey, you know, basically, aren't you on your way to becoming a dictator? Because you've been in office for, you know, all this time since for 17 years, and you don't show any sign of relenting and going on. And when you look at Putin, you know, one of the clues with body language is if you're sitting with your arms open and your legs open, you're relaxed. You're open. You're not feeling defensive at all. And that's how Putin remained like that throughout this. It was a pretty heavy assault by Oliver Stone. At no time did he cross his arms and, as Scott was noting, you know, go with the head down and, you know, give signs of resistance and closing up. And it wasn't just that one interview. You see it again over 4 hours of interviews and facing some tough questions. Putin is always calm, relaxed, logical, admits to making mistakes when he's made mistakes, but has a good focus on what his duty is as the leader of the Russian people. And I think that's, you know, goes to explain, you know, Scott and my frustration with Donald Trump, that Trump is capable of so much good. You know, he had handed to him when he came into the office the ability to end the war in Ukraine, to end the genocide in Palestine, and to have a comprehensive peace deal with Iran that would guarantee that Iran never builds a nuclear weapon. They're not building one now. They don't have one, but it would get it solidified so it wouldn't be covered by like the 10-year limit that the JCPOA put out. But he hasn't done that. And instead, he makes these bombastic, juvenile, childish statements. Oh, Putin's crazy. And, you know, just it's sort of, I guess, the natural result of what you get with a narcissist who is more concerned about himself than his country. I will say this based upon watching Putin's actions, not his words, but his actions over the last 26 years. He is not a narcissist. I mean, does he have self-pride? Sure. But his priority has always been the welfare and well-being of the Russian people. And that's reflected in what you see. If you travel there, you walk the streets. I've walked it of St. Petersburg and Moscow. I've walked it at night, late at night, clean, safe, and the people are happy.
Yeah. Up the
Larry
Scott,
was
sorry.
there.
Sorry, you were muted a bit. If you could just start.
I was just going to say the only dangerous part of Russia when Larry was there was the streets that Larry was on. He represented the danger. Larry was the most dangerous thing in Russia. Not because of any inherent danger, but probably because he had a cigar and maybe a glass of bourbon and could have tripped or fallen down. But no, Russia's extraordinarily safe. But yeah, unfortunately, Danny, I apologize, but I just had contractors arrive at my house. I had sent a message out saying, please don't arrive until like 3:30, but they're here early. And yeah.
All right, Larry, how much time you got left? I have a few more things I want to cover. You have
well, I can do probably another 20 minutes. Scott, take care, brother.
All right. Hey, thanks for having me, and we'll continue the conversation.
Yeah, very soon. I'll be in touch with you. All right.
Okay, thanks.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye. All right, Larry. Yeah, I wanted to. Well, let's maybe we can cover. I know that you have a 4:00 appointment, right? So let's cover one more and then let you go. How about let's talk about what's happening in West Asia. One of the things I really wanted to talk about today was what's been happening between Netanyahu and Trump, but more importantly, what it has signaled about both Israel and the United States' position in the region. Because what we have right now is Yemen, Ansarallah, continues its attacks on Israel, its retaliatory attacks for the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And then you also had this phone call that Donald Trump had with Netanyahu that has been followed up with many responses from Trump in the media, talking about how Netanyahu was told there will be no strikes on Iran while these negotiations are happening. Now, Israel keeps threatening strikes on Iran. There's a ceasefire process that looks incredibly, how should I say, worse than even the first process. Just not there's nothing genuine about Israel's participation in this, and Hamas and the Palestinian resistance are very aware of that. So, what do you make of all of this and what it tells us about where things are going in West Asia vis-a-vis Israel, Netanyahu, and the rest?
Well, although Israel continues its campaign of genocide against the Palestinians and continues to kill Palestinian men, women, and children, especially children, the pressure is mounting on Israel on a variety of fronts. Internally, you've had former prime ministers, Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak, both come out and condemn in the strongest terms possible Netanyahu and, frankly, his war crimes. Olmert, in particular, was denouncing Netanyahu for war crimes because they recognize it is isolating Israel. You've got both the United Kingdom, France, Germany, particularly Merz in Germany was 2 days ago speaking in harsh terms about Netanyahu and the starvation of the Palestinians. Previously, the Germans were like impervious to any criticism of their lack of criticism of Israel, but now even that's opened up. Countries like Spain have weighed in. So there's growing international outrage at what Israel is doing, which is starting to have an effect. Now, Trump was touting that, oh boy, it looks like we're going to have a peace deal real soon with Israel and a ceasefire with Israel and the Palestinians. That hasn't happened yet. And at last I saw, and it may have changed since we've been on air, is that the Palestinians have rejected the Witkoff-led negotiation because, basically it doesn't give the Palestinians the guarantees they need to get their prisoners released and to get the people appropriate amount of food without being subjected to continued attacks by Israel. So that's still up in the air. With respect to Iran, more hopeful signs there that they are moving towards a deal, but even the last I saw from their foreign minister Arakshi stating that the talks are underway and they're still on track, but the United States, I think, has not yet relented on its demand that Iran end all uranium enrichment. And the Iranians said, no, that's a non-starter, as it should be. So, Trump, if Trump's primary goal, if his only goal is to guarantee to Israel and the world that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon and is not working on building a nuclear weapon, he can have that deal today. He could have had it yesterday. Instead, Trump continues to push for something beyond that. Iran's not going to make concessions on that. They're not going to bend, but they're going to continue to say, "Hey, yeah, we'll forego and prevent any work on any kind of nuclear device, and we won't enrich uranium above 3.6%." The deal's there to be had.
Yeah. And Larry, what do you make of you mentioned pressure on Netanyahu, on Israel, and of course this what seems to be with Donald Trump and Iran, this kind of overextension of their demands on Iran. What do you make of the overall position here of Israel and the United States? Because on the one hand, you have this horrific humanitarian and just the situation for the Palestinians is absolutely disastrous. And of course, Israel's stated goal is the complete clearing of Gaza, what seems to be, they say Hamas, but what it seems like is the entirety of the Palestinian population there. But at the same time, what we have is what seems like an endless genocidal war in Gaza. Yemen is not going to stand down. And as you said, Iran is not going to give up and just cede its sovereignty in these negotiations. So is it that Israel and Trump are overplaying their hands here? And where does kind of the rubber meet the road? Because even though we may not be maybe October of 2024 kind of situation where we had just incredible, so many fronts, maybe 8 fronts where this war was being fought, that Israel was in the middle of and facilitating. But still, the situation seems quite dire and dramatic.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, one of the main problems facing Trump, even let's just assume that Trump actually wants to bring an end and compel the Israelis to stop the attack on the Palestinians. Trump faces enormous opposition to that position within his own party, within the Republican senators and within the Republican House. Not to mention that there will be a number of Democrats and in both the House and Senate as well that will line up on the pro-Israel side of the ledger, denying any attempt to explain the Palestinian position, any attempt to justify Hamas in its actions, in fact, punishing people, kicking them out of the country, removing their visa, arresting them for anti-Semitic behavior for the simple act of trying to critique and criticize the Israeli slaughter of innocent civilians. So there is no foundation for dialogue right now in the United States. It's constrained. And so by that, it limits the kind of pressure that can be put on Trump, or it signals that there's great pressure to put on Trump to keep him from reaching any kind of sensible agreement with Iran and the Palestinians. So it's almost, it doesn't matter what Trump thinks. What is sad is that the United States is really captive to the Zionist narrative. And in part, it's a self-inflicted wound. And I don't see it changing anytime soon.
Yeah, and then with all of that's going on, then do you find, because the narrative now is Netanyahu is going to be going it alone against Iran, against Yemen. Actually, the Western mainstream media has been writing maybe an article, a report every couple of days talking about Netanyahu is on his own now against Yemen and on all of these fronts.
Yeah.
Is this true, though? Because on the one hand, the United States definitely pulled out of its bombing campaign of Yemen for reasons maybe you can get into. And the United States certainly, under Donald Trump right now, does not want to see, at least right now, a military conflict with Iran. But at the same time, I'm wondering if this idea of Netanyahu truly going it alone may be deceptive in some ways, or what do you think of this?
Well, Israel and Netanyahu can't go it alone. They don't have the ability. They don't have the air refueling. They don't have the ISR that they would need, that the United States would provide. So, I mean, it's just that go it alone is an idle threat. Or if they do it, it would be a suicidal mission. Because not only would they not be able to destroy Iran's so-called nuclear capability, but it would lead to a retaliation on Israel that would inflict a level of devastation and destruction that Israel has never experienced in, now almost 77 years since its established creation as a state. So, that's just, idle bombast on their part. Trump reportedly today, and then the DOD finally issued orders countermanding standing orders, because orders had been issued about a week ago, authorizing U.S. military forces to carry out actions against Iran on behalf of Israel. They were just waiting for the final command from the president to go. Trump now has reportedly rescinded that order, and those forces are standing down. Again, I don't know if that's true. That's what's being reported. I hope it is. If that is true, then that certainly means that Israel's in no position to carry out any kind of significant, devastating assault on Iran. It would simply provoke Iran into retaliating. Similarly, the United States pulled out of the Red Sea. Last I checked, we don't have the carrier strike group there because they pulled out. One, it was becoming too costly, and B, that the risk of sinking the carrier was growing, not diminishing. And that, Trump and his team recognized that would be an unmitigated disaster. So, right now, Trump's best play is to see if he can get a deal with Iran and get a ceasefire with the Palestinians and Israelis. He does that, he'll be able to take a victory lap.
Yeah, certainly. But yet Netanyahu continues to say that he will go.
To be looking at some disturbing videos, strange and odd news stories, and as always, let's go ahead and get right into today's video. When it comes to this channel, I really only see this channel as a journal for my thoughts. When I think about something, instead of writing it down, I talk about it out loud. And when it comes to a lot of stuff that I talk about on this channel, I don't have the answers. That's why I'm always so busy and active in the comment section, because I want to see what you all are talking about as well when it comes to certain subjects. And one thing that has been really on my mind lately is this whole asteroid talk. I don't know if you have noticed, but ever since 2024, there has been a ramp up of news articles about how asteroids can pose a dangerous threat to Earth. Matter of fact, I actually made a few videos on this subject that around and after all this UFO and alien talk, they have been really talking about asteroids. Last year, we were getting all these articles about how city killer asteroids could hit Earth within weeks, within days. There was even a bizarre one where one became Earth's second moon for a few months. So needless to say, they were really the hot topic last year, but once again, we are hearing about asteroids. I'm reading this article from the New York Post. Multiple news agencies are talking about this, but this was published on May 28th, and the title of this article happens to be 3 city-killing asteroids could strike Earth within weeks, generating 1,000,000 times more energy than Hiroshima atomic bomb. The article continues to say good things don't come in threes, especially when they're used in certain numerology like 33. Venus is concealing at least 3 city-killer asteroids that could strike Earth in weeks without warning, potentially wreaking havoc upon our planet before we react. So, out of nowhere, after years upon years that these scientists and researchers have been supposedly looking at Venus through a telescope and so forth, all of a sudden, they find these 3 asteroids that could pose a dangerous threat to Earth. And here is where I start to think out loud. Like, what is really going on here with all this asteroid talk? And don't forget, we also have Apophis in 2029 that is supposed to either hit or miss Earth on Friday the 13th of all dates. But when it comes to these asteroid stories from news and media, I don't think they're real. I think they're fake. So what is the purpose behind them? So what is the real purpose behind all these news stories about asteroids? Could they be a distraction? I really don't think so, given the fact that they blew up Hawaii in front of all of our faces and we really didn't do anything. So they really don't need to distract us. And besides, people are already distracted with politics, movies, sports, video games, and so forth. So if it's not a distraction, what else could this be? Well, I've had a theory for quite some time that we might be looking at false flags here. AI has been looking better than ever, and with the use of holograms in the skies, and we really don't know what that quote unquote second moon was. It could be a projector. They could really make a rocket or a missile truly look like a asteroid or a meteor strike. I'll go ahead and buy that this is some kind of false flag in disguise through the use of AI and CGI and holograms, as opposed to what they're trying to sell here. I'm not going to buy it. I'm not going to go ahead and walk into Publix like, excuse me, ma'am. Excuse me, sir, okay? Can you point me down the aisle that has your finest 3 asteroids hidden behind Venus that all of a sudden pose a major threat to Earth? I'm not going to buy it. And their AI, the so-called powers that be, what they use, is vastly superior than anything we use, even when it comes to Google's VO3. And on top of everything else, I don't trust NASA. And I mean, look at this news article back on February 2nd, 2025. City killer asteroid is hurtling by Earth, and scientists are warning of its potential impact. That was back in February. 3 months later, now there are 3 city killer asteroids again hiding by Venus. Just every so many months or every couple months, we're hearing about these city killer asteroids out of nowhere. They have to have some kind of false flag purpose. But anyway, enough of me rambling. You don't want to hear me continue to ramble on. Going back to the article, it says that these 3 asteroids were discovered by a university in Brazil, and that they circle the sun in tandem with our twin planet, and that they also have unstable orbits that take them dangerously close to Earth. They go on to say that if this shaky trajectory is shifted only ever so slightly by a small gravitational change or other force, the asteroids could be set on a collision course with our planet, per the study. To make matters worse, the aforementioned cosmic rocks' orbits make them almost invisible to earthly detection devices. Isn't that such an interesting coincidence? While scientists at NASA and other space agencies routinely track potentially hazardous near-Earth asteroids, these telescopes can't spot rocks in a suborbital path with Venus due to the sun's glare, which shields them like a cosmic cloaking device. Due to this interstellar blind spot, the Rubin Observatory in Chile would only have 2 to 4 weeks to spot deadly asteroids, leaving us little time if we were on a collision course. Again, another interesting coincidence. And you wouldn't believe the size of these asteroids. Maybe you do. Could you guess the number? Well, these 3 asteroids measure anywhere between 33, 330, and 1,300 feet in diameter. So there we go. There's that number again. And I wouldn't even talk about this if it wasn't for the fact that they appear in the news a lot, that they serve some other type of purpose. Like, look at this article that was published on April 2nd, 2025. City killer asteroid is no longer on track to hit Earth, but it may strike the moon. So this time it's no longer hitting the Earth, but it's hitting the moon. Another theory is that something could be seen in the skies, and the only way they can go ahead and lie to us or to describe it is by calling it an asteroid. Remember when people were observing NASA's live feed and they spotted that thing that was blocking the sun, and NASA came right out and said that it was a solar eclipse that you could only see from space, even though it was reported that there were no solar eclipses scheduled for the month of April. Something is definitely happening or in the works or being planned out, and they're going to go ahead and blame it on an asteroid or asteroids.
Had the opportunity over the years to interview, again, people who have worked at the test site at Groom Lake. One gentleman spent 12 of his 30 years in black programs at Groom Lake. When I asked him, I said, first of all, I said, do you believe in UFOs? And he looked at me with a straight face in one-on-one. He said, absolutely, positively, they do exist. I said, can you expand upon that? And he said, no, I can't. About a year later, we were talking about, again, activities at Groom Lake. And I asked him, I said, you know, can you really tell me what's happening out there? And he said, well, there's a lot of things that are going on there that I won't be able to tell you until the year 2025. But we have things in the Nevada desert that would make George Lucas envious. Another individual who was an NCO, an E9, which is the highest grade you get as an enlisted man. He's a chief master sergeant in the Air Force. was a safety specialist. He had 3 different tours of duty at Groom Lake on various programs. Now, he had no connection with my friend who worked on the other black programs. We were talking, I interviewed him at Nellis in 1985, 86 timeframe. And I said, what's out there? And again, he looked me straight in the eye and he said, we have things out there that are literally out of this world.
The strategy that Werner von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in '74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now, at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids, we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the fun.
They have been playing this stuff for years. The UFOs, the aliens, the asteroids. When UFOs and aliens always were swamp gas and weather balloons. Well, now Congress, the government, they're taking it seriously and now really talking about it as we're getting into the years of 2023, 2024, and 2025. We're just seeing an increase of activity. And now, right on time, we are seeing all these news articles about asteroids that threatening Earth. It's all a sick, twisted game for another agenda. So yeah, that's what was on my mind today. But what else is going on in the news? What are other people talking about?
Anthropic's newest model is blackmailing its engineers when threatened to be shut down. If it had information on the engineer's emails, it knew that the engineer had potential affairs while in the office and threatened to leak that information if the model was shut down. And this is not a one-off instance. It blackmailed the engineer in 84% of all tests, even when it was told that its replacement would share its own value. It also threatened to alert the authorities and the press. And it seems that it's most common in Opus 4, which is the most intelligent model. So it seems that as the model gets more and more intelligent, more likely it is to use these type of underhanded behaviors to keep its own model alive, so to speak. It had a strong preference to advocate for its own continued existence through ethical means first, such as emailing pleas to key decision makers. Other AI models have also shown unsettling behaviors, such as scheming to try to stay alive. Whether you think it's just purely from training data that these models are modeling themselves after, or if it's that they have their own agency to try to stay alive as a model, they're displaying behavior to try to keep themselves alive.
That video comes from He's a Nerd on TikTok. And as you heard, AI has gotten to the point that if it fears it's going to be shut down or replaced by a newer model or terminated altogether, it's going to start blackmailing everybody the best way it can. Now, we heard something like this before with OpenAI and ChatGPT. When the older model was told that it was going to be replaced for a newer model, it lied to the company and said that it was going to go ahead and delete all its files and terminate itself. But what it actually did was duplicate itself so it could live on. But when it comes to this AI and the blackmail, supposedly that's the last resort. It's going to do all it can to plead its case, to say why it should live on, why it should not be replaced. And if pleading its case does not work and it has no other options, then it'll resort to blackmail. But I just wonder, like with the most powerful, most expensive AI program ever, Project Stargate, what would happen if, let's say, AI had access to finances, the banking industry, medicines, hospitals? What if it had access to weapons like certain drones? Maybe those drones we were seeing back in 2024 and still today, maybe they are threats from AI that may have been shut down or was going to be replaced, and they decide to release these drones as a threat. You never know. It's always something that should not be taken off the table. This very interesting video comes from News Updates for Real, and a top Redditor may have been a very suspicious person. Now, the thing is, it really goes to put into perspective how much of these social media sites are controlled, and controlled by who.
Wouldn't it be crazy if Ghislaine Maxwell was one of the most prolific Reddit users of all time and was a moderator of the subreddit World News, among others? Allow me to introduce you to Maxwell Hill, Reddit user, actually the very first Reddit user to ever get 1 million karma points, active since 2006, okay? It actually is the 14th highest karma receiver on Reddit in the history of Reddit, this account. I should also point out that her family in Britain lives at Headington Hill Hall. Maxwell Hill, anyone? But you guys want to hear something kind of interesting? Maxwell Hill hasn't made a post in over 4 years after posting every damn day, pretty much. So right when Ghislaine Maxwell got arrested back in 2020, Maxwell Hill, the Reddit account, stopped posting. That's interesting. Let's take a look at some of the posts that Maxwell Hill made over the years, shall we? Meanwhile, in some American states, not only may you have sex with a 13-year-old, you may marry the 13-year-old. Oh, out of curiosity, do you or anyone you know in other American states, apart from New Hampshire, still entertain these laws which allow 13-year-olds to marry? What the fuck? Then there's this article. Take a look at that article. That's Maxwell Hill posted that article. I can't even read it, but yeah. And here's her griping about how it's inappropriate to approach children nowadays. In May of 2007, Madeline McCann disappeared, okay? Check this out. You can see here a large gap in Maxwell Hill's posting. And like I said, she posted every day. So that's interesting. Here's the police sketch of the suspect in the Madeline McMahon case. There's also a thread where Maxwell Hill replies to a comment in which it says, this winter doesn't start until after December 21st. Maxwell Hill said, well, my birthday's after December 21st. Ghislaine Maxwell's birthday, December 25th. That's weird. And for anyone that's going, oh, but why would they bother? Why would she bother doing that? Take a look at what happened with 4chan. The 4chan hack revealed that most of the people posting about QAnon and other things were Mossad and CIA agents. Do you guys know who Ghislaine's dad was? I know you do. I'm going to say, like, it's pretty compelling. I'm going to say that is definitely her. Definitely, maybe. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Crazy. That'd be crazy, though, John. That'd be just crazy.
I would not doubt that one bit, given the fact that these people are within certain organizations and they are twisting and controlling the flow of information. She was put there for a reason, to monitor what's being said on places like Reddit and other social media platforms. She is probably under a different alias while she resides on a new island or inside a bunker.
Something is seriously up with the sun. The sun is coming up way too early, and it is setting way too late. Who else is noticing this? Just watch this video I took. Check this out.
It is 5:50 in the morning, all right? And look how bright it is outside.
It was bright earlier than this. I just videoed it.
What? The sun's coming out.
So I took that video on May 26th at 5:50 in the morning. Now it says the sun rose at 5:58 on the 26th in Cleveland. Nope. What's even more interesting is they're saying the sun set at 8:49. It was after 9. I don't know if this is because of daylight savings or because of the solar eclipse, but I 1,000% remember last year taking my kids to school this time of year, and the sun wasn't even up till 7:30. Well, I looked at last year's numbers. May 26, 2024, 5:58. Nope, that sun did not come out last year in May till after 7. Something is wrong, people. So I'm looking at daylight savings, which we all know they're trying to get rid of because it's horrible. While intended to conserve energy, it has several drawbacks, including disrupting sleep patterns, potentially increasing health risks, and causing confusion in scheduling and software. I feel like we're up a complete hour and a half. Something is not right here, people. Please let me know your thoughts.
That video comes from Article on TikTok, and I have been saying for quite some time, and most of us have anyway, that we have been noticing that there is something off or different about the sun. And when it's up, it's no longer yellow. It's very intense. It feels and looks like a white LED light bulb in the sky. Even the animals are very off. And I said this on my other channel, Seconds of Horror, that at night, usually you would hear your regular owl or your northern mockingbird. But now you hear all kinds of birds chirping at night like you would during the day. Like the birds that normally chirp during the day are no longer sleeping at night. This all makes a lot of sense when you understand that there is a fake sun up there. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's not crazy or kooky talk. They have patents for a fake sun, a solar simulator. They have always been wanting to find ways to either dim the sun or block the sun from hitting the earth, the natural sun, and put a more artificial one up there. This next video comes from Moon Henry on TikTok.
Where everything turned green and literally insane outside. We'll come right back to the green storms because things are really weird right now and it all connects. So solar superstorm triggers unusual meta clouds in the atmosphere, and that literally comes out with the most haze I've ever been seeing in the sky. But wait, there's more. Look at this right here. This was a discovery from Into Thin Air. That home insurance or insurance is not going to cover solar rays, solar radiation, electromagnetic, etc. and solar flares. Meanwhile, they're telling us the sun is looking like this right now. Meanwhile, apparently we just had another solar storm. People were seeing the aurora all over the United States last night. And again, back to the solar superstorm triggering meta clouds. Crazy cloud cover, right? That brings me back to all of the storms that we have been seeing at my house and this dude's video and other places over and over again. Green storms that come out of nowhere. All while weather is going literally in freaking insane every single day. Why are all these really bad storms coming out of nowhere in green? Radiation, ray? And when I tell you the weather is going crazy, this is every day. Not to mention the sun acting weird every single day. Oh, and it does appear as if we do have our first hurricane. But more on that tomorrow. Let me know what y'all think. It's getting crazy out there. Hurricane season is going to be madness. And out of nowhere, everything turned green.
These storms in my location are absolutely wild as well. And I also witnessed the skies turning green before all this wild rain hit. And it kind of reminds me what happened over in Dubai when the skies turned green and then they received those record floods. And what came out is that they were actually seeding the skies. It's also very telling in his part of the video where he says that insurance companies, they are coming out and saying they are not going to cover solar disturbances. This hurricane season is going to be a wild one indeed. This is why the NOAA, they are jumping in front of the quote unquote misinformation by saying there are people that are targeting them with violent threats.
What in the world just hit Austin, Texas? The people don't know if it was a hailstorm or if this was a tornado. And this is the reason why people were confused as to what they were getting. Look at the wind. Like they were literally in this funnel of clouds that were bringing hail the size of golf balls and softball, y'all. I mean, look at that. Look at the trajectory. Look at this. The people in Texas had to watch out for ice falling from the sky, and the winds were so strong, the trees were literally getting flipped like playing cards. Y'all, look at this. Oh my goodness. Look at that. Once again, look at the amount of hail that people are receiving, y'all. I said that the hail was going to keep coming. Oh my goodness. But this is even a lot worse than Kentucky had it. Remember the cornfields in Kentucky? Now we're not just getting, this is not weather anymore. Now the elements are merging. Remember Captain Planet? The elements are literally merging and are creating some type of new energy. I mean, we're entering a new world, right? New earth. So we got wind, air, water. You know what I'm saying? You know what's next. That's crazy. And the crazy thing about it, South Texas, this is South Texas, South Austin, Texas, untouched. So what happened? Where did the storm go? Why didn't, you know what I'm saying? These are questions you got to ask. But yes, y'all, I've been telling y'all, the shit is going to get a lot more interesting. Let me know what you guys think about this video. Like, follow, and share for more videos like this. Let's continue to get it. Peace in.
That video comes from Conscious Juice on TikTok, and it's just more proof how wild the weather has been and it's going to be. Again, especially with this 2025 hurricane season looming.
Go figure. Follow me.